What if a single story, softly carried across centuries, could settle the turbulence in your mind tonight? For the next hours, you are entering a stream of quiet tales, once treasured so deeply that even rulers stepped away from power to taste their meaning. There is something gentle and intimate about many hearts seeking ease at the same time. Scattered across different places, yet breathing together, settle yourself beside whatever gives you a sense of safety. These are not merely old stories. They are remedies refined over 1,000 years, offered by teachers who learned how to remain steady while the world shifted beneath their feet. The movement toward a deeper peace begins without effort, right where you are. In Japan, during a period when traditions were dissolving and unfamiliar ideas arrived from distant lands, a Zen master named Nanin lived with quiet clarity. This was the beginning of a new era, when the country opened itself after long isolation. Authority was changing hands. Warriors put aside their swords. Customs once believed to be permanent faded like autumn leaves carried away by wind. Even so, the hunger for understanding did not disappear. A university professor, steeped in Western philosophy and scientific thought, came to see Nanin after hearing rumors of a way of knowing that could not be contained in books. Nanin welcomed him calmly and began to prepare tea. The professor, filled with enthusiasm, spoke without pause about his education, his theories of mind, his interpretations of Eastern ideas. His words spilled out endlessly. Nanin listened, lifting the teapot with unhurried attention. He poured tea into the visitor's cup until it was full, then continued pouring. Tea overflowed, spreading across the table and dripping onto the floor. Alarm rose in the professor's voice as he protested that the cup could hold no more. Nanin gently set the pot aside and met his gaze. "Like this cup," he said, "you are filled with your own views. How can anything new enter until you make space?" In that instant, the professor glimpsed a truth no lecture had ever offered. Learning begins not with accumulation, but with openness. This openness is known in Zen as beginner's mind, the ability to meet each moment unburdened by what we believe we already understand. During that same time of transition, wandering monks moved along mountain paths, carrying nothing beyond robes and a bowl, trusting entirely in what the day would bring. Their way rested on the understanding that awakening grows from surrender rather than comfort. Among them was Gudo, a teacher held in the highest regard, even guiding the emperor, yet he often left the palace to walk as a simple mendicant. One night, rain fell heavily as Gudo approached a small village. His sandals were worn thin, his robes soaked. At a modest farmhouse, he noticed sandals drying by the window. When he knocked, a tired woman greeted him. Seeing his condition, she offered him shelter and dry footwear. Inside, sorrow filled the room. The children sat silently, and the woman's eyes revealed long-held grief. She spoke of her husband, lost in gambling and drink. Sometimes violent, sometimes gone for days, leaving fear behind. Gudo listened and said only that he would help. He gave her money, asking her to buy food and wine and then rest. Late that night, the husband returned, intoxicated and demanding. From the darkness, Gudo spoke gently, explaining he had been caught in the rain and invited inside, and that he had brought wine and fish in gratitude. The man gladly accepted, ate, drank, and soon collapsed into sleep. Gudo remained seated beside him in silent meditation through the night, a steady presence without judgment. When morning came, the man awoke confused to find a monk beside him. Upon learning that this was Gudodo, the revered teacher, Shame overwhelmed him. He begged forgiveness, feeling unworthy. Gudo spoke simply of impermanence and the brevity of life, pointing out that each moment offers a chance to choose differently. The man wept, seeing his own life clearly for the first time. As Gudo prepared to leave, the man insisted on carrying his belongings, walking farther and farther, unwilling to part from such acceptance. Eventually, he declared his wish to follow Gudo always. Compassion, Zen reminds us, does not scold. It meets people where they stand. In the same region lived another master, Hakuin, known for his simplicity and direct approach. His path emphasized sudden awakening through immediate experience. Near his temple lived a family with a young daughter, admired for her grace. When she was found to be pregnant, her parents demanded the father's name. After enduring their anger, she accused Hakuin. The parents confronted him furiously. He responded with only a calm acknowledgement, neither defending nor denying. When the child was born, they brought the baby to Hakuin, declaring it his responsibility. His reputation collapsed. Students left. Admirers turned away. Hakuin accepted the child, caring for it tenderly, begging milk, staying awake through long nights. His quiet devotion slowly stirred doubt among those who had condemned him. After a year, the young mother confessed the truth. The parents returned in shame, apologizing and reclaiming the child. Hakuin handed the baby back with the same words he had spoken before. This is equanimity, the steadiness that remains untouched by praise or blame. These stories reveal a shared insight. Peace does not arise from reshaping circumstances, but from releasing resistance to what appears. None of these teachers tried to control events. They responded with simplicity, doing what the moment required without self-protection. This is the heart of Zen, not thinking your way into calm, but living it. Each moment invites the same response, an empty cup, an open heart, a mind that allows things to be as they are. In the courtyards of old temples, where incense drifted through the air and wooden sandals echoed softly on stone, insight often appeared through the most ordinary encounters. One master, known as Bankei, discovered that truth rarely announces itself loudly. It reveals itself when fixed ideas loosen their grip and the mind returns to what he called the unborn awareness, a clarity present before thoughts take shape. He did not align himself with any single school. Farmers, merchants, monks, and scholars gathered to hear him speak, drawn by a simplicity that cut through complexity. This mix of people sometimes stirred tension, as followers of other traditions felt threatened by the ease with which his words reached the heart. On one afternoon, as Bankei addressed a large assembly, a priest from a rival sect pushed forward, his voice sharp with anger. He accused Bankei of drawing followers away, challenging him openly. He demanded to know whether Bankei could force someone like him to obey. A hush fell over the crowd, many expecting an argument or a display of authority. Bankei responded with a warm smile, inviting the priest to stand beside him. He asked him to move left, then right, making small requests delivered without pressure. Each time, the priest complied automatically. Bankei gently pointed out what had just occurred. Without debate or force, obedience had already happened. The priest's anger dissolved, and he found himself sitting quietly among the listeners, his challenge emptied of heat. What this revealed was not dominance, but an understanding of human nature. Beneath defensiveness lies a natural readiness to respond, rather than opposing aggression with resistance. Bankei met it with ease, allowing it to soften on its own. In daily life, the same opportunity appears again and again. When met with harshness, the habitual reaction is to harden. Yet, gentleness can disarm where confrontation fails. Not far from there stood a temple led by a master known for his intensity and uncompromising methods. His presence was so forceful that students both feared and respected him. Among those students was a young boy named Toyo, only 12 years old. Each day, Toyo watched older disciples enter private instruction sessions, returning changed, sometimes shaken, sometimes radiant. He longed to take part, pleading repeatedly. At first he was refused because of his age, but persistence eventually opened the door. When Toyo finally entered the master's room, his heart raced with anticipation. After the formal bows, the master spoke a single challenge, asking him to demonstrate the sound of one hand. Toyo left bewildered, his mind searching desperately for an answer. He listened to the night sounds from his window, grasping at possibilities. The distant music of entertainers seemed promising. He returned proudly, mimicking the melody, only to be dismissed. He tried again and again, bringing sounds of dripping water, wind through trees, birds calling in darkness. Each offering was rejected. Months passed, filled with frustration and effort, yet the master remained unmoved. What Toyo did not yet see was that every sound he presented was still something he could grasp, something he could point to. The question was not asking for noise, but for direct experience beyond concepts. Slowly, exhaustion wore away his striving. One night, sitting quietly, he stopped searching. In that stillness, the answer arrived without form. When he returned, empty-handed and silent, the master nodded. Without words, understanding had ripened. Again and again, Zen points toward this same discovery. As long as the mind clings, it remains restless. When grasping falls away, clarity reveals itself. Whether through overflowing teacups, silent companionship, false accusations, gentle persuasion, or impossible questions, the teaching is consistent. Reality does not require defense. It asks only to be met fully. As these stories flow together, a pattern becomes visible. Each master responded without hesitation, yet without calculation. There was no rehearsed wisdom, no strategy. Action arose naturally, shaped by attention rather than fear. This is what allows peace to endure even when circumstances remain unsettled. The outer world may continue shifting, but the inner posture stays relaxed. The invitation offered here is simple, though not always easy. To notice how often tension is self-created through resistance. To see how quickly the mind fills its own cup, leaving no room for what is present. To recognize that compassion does not need instruction manuals, and acceptance does not imply weakness. It is strength without armor. When listening to these accounts, something familiar may stir. Not recognition of the characters, but recognition of oneself. The professor eager to display knowledge, the husband lost in habit. The teacher falsely accused, the challenger driven by pride, the child straining for an answer. All of them live within a single mind. Zen does not attempt to erase these parts. It invites them to rest. In resting, the struggle loosens. What remains is an awareness that can hold joy and sorrow without being torn apart. This awareness does not belong to the past or to distant masters. It is present now, beneath thought, steady and unremarkable. When allowed, it supports every breath. There is nothing mystical required to touch it, only a willingness to stop adding, to stop correcting, to stop demanding that life be different before peace is allowed. In this simplicity, ancient wisdom becomes intimate. It moves from story into lived experience, from something heard into something felt. As one tale fades into another, the thread continues unbroken. Each moment, like each story, stands complete on its own. Nothing extra is needed. Nothing is missing. The quiet that these teachers embodied is not something they possessed. It is something they stopped interfering with. As Toyo continued returning to his teacher, the rhythm of effort and disappointment slowly reshaped him. Each rejection stripped away another layer of expectation. The sounds he brought were no longer offered with confidence, but with uncertainty. Then with humility. Over time, even humility dissolved. What remained was simple presence. The master's refusal was not punishment nor cruelty. It was an invitation to abandon the habit of grasping altogether. When Toyo finally arrived without an answer, without even the urge to present one, something essential shifted. The question no longer hovered in his mind. It vanished, and with it vanished the one who had been trying so hard to solve it. Zen often works this way. It exhausts the seeking mind until surrender becomes natural. Not surrender to an authority, but to reality itself. When the effort to control understanding falls away, insight appears quietly, without announcement. This is why the deepest teachings are so difficult to explain. They are not ideas to be collected, but movements of letting go. The stories of these masters are not meant to elevate them above ordinary life. They are mirrors. Each situation they encountered is one we face in different forms. A conversation where we feel the need to prove ourselves. A conflict where we long to be right. An accusation that feels unbearable. A problem we attack with effort. Until we are too tired to continue. In each case, the same pattern emerges. Tension tightens when we resist what is here. Ease returns when resistance loosens. Zen does not promise a life without difficulty. The eras described in these stories were marked by upheaval, loss, and uncertainty. Empires weakened. Traditions faded. Families struggled. Yet the masters did not retreat from this instability. They lived directly within it, responding without bitterness. Their calm was not fragile. It did not depend on conditions behaving properly. It arose from intimacy with impermanence. Impermanence is often spoken of as a philosophical idea, but in Zen, it is experienced moment by moment. Tea overflows. Rain soaks. Sandals. Reputation collapses. Sounds arise and fade in the night. Nothing stays long enough to be held. Suffering begins when we try to freeze what cannot remain still. Peace begins when we stop demanding permanence from a moving world. The simplicity of these teachings can be unsettling. The mind prefers complexity, methods, and guarantees. It wants a sequence to follow, a system to master. Zen offers none of these. It points instead to what is already functioning. Breathing happens. Hearing happens. Awareness happens. The problem is not that something is missing, but that attention is divided by commentary. When Nanin poured tea beyond the brim, he was not insulting the professor. He was demonstrating a fact. A full cup cannot receive. A mind crowded with conclusions cannot listen. Emptiness, in this sense, is not a void, but a readiness. It is spaciousness that allows life to arrive without distortion. Gudo's presence beside the drunken man was not a strategy for reform. It was a human response free of judgment. By offering companionship instead of condemnation, he revealed an alternative way of being. The transformation that followed did not come from fear or obligation. It came from being seen without rejection. Hakuin's steady acceptance in the face of false blame was not indifference. It was deep trust in reality as it unfolded. By refusing to defend an image of himself, he protected something far more valuable. His actions spoke more clearly than explanations ever could. When the truth emerged, nothing needed to be repaired. There had been no resistance. Bankei's gentle handling of confrontation showed how easily aggression dissolves when it finds no opposition. He did not seek to win. He did not seek to teach a lesson. He responded as one person to another, without hierarchy. In doing so, he exposed the emptiness of the challenge itself. Toyo's struggle with the sound of one hand reveals how the search for answers often obscures understanding. As long as he listened for something to grasp, he remained stuck. Only when listening itself became complete did the koan resolve, not as a solution, but as a disappearance of the question. These teachings converge on a single point. Peace is not produced, it is uncovered. It emerges when unnecessary effort stops. This stopping cannot be forced. It happens when insight matures on its own. Often after exhaustion, often after disappointment. In this way, failure becomes a teacher. Listening to these stories, there may be moments of recognition followed by moments of resistance. The mind may agree, then object. This, too, is part of the process. Zen does not ask for agreement. It asks for observation, to notice how thoughts arise, insist, and fade, to see how emotions swell and subside, to witness how identity is constructed from reactions. In daily life, opportunities for this observation are endless. Waiting in line, receiving criticism, feeling misunderstood. Each moment carries the same invitation the masters accepted: to meet what appears without adding a second layer of struggle, to allow discomfort without immediately seeking escape, to remain present even when certainty is absent. Over time, this way of meeting life reshapes perception. What once felt threatening begins to feel workable. What once demanded immediate resolution reveals its own rhythm. Trust grows, not in outcomes, but in the capacity to respond. This trust is quiet. It does not announce itself as confidence. It feels more like ease. The stories continue because life continues. There is no final lesson, no concluding statement that closes the path. Each ending is simply a pause before another beginning. Zen resists neat conclusions because awareness itself has none. It flows, adapts, responds. As these accounts settle into you, there is no need to remember them precisely. Their purpose is not retention. Their purpose is resonance. If something softens, if breathing becomes easier, if the urge to control relaxes even briefly, the teaching has already done its work. What remains is not an instruction, but an atmosphere, a sense that nothing essential is missing, that clarity is closer than thought, that peace does not need to be imported from ancient times or distant places. It is present wherever attention rests, without demand. And so the stories keep unfolding, not as history, but as reflections of a single ongoing moment that never truly begins and never fully ends. Nearly a full year passed. The bright excitement Toyo once carried had faded, replaced by a deeper state that was neither frustrated nor strained. It was a sincere not knowing, open and watchful. Every sound his mind could invent had been tried and discarded. One quiet evening, seated in meditation, effort finally loosened its grip. Toyo stopped searching for the sound of one hand and rested in the stillness that exists before sound appears. In that complete quiet, understanding arose without form. When he next sat before his teacher and heard the familiar question, Toyo did not answer. He remained silent, unmoving. For the first time in all those months, the master smiled. "You have heard it," he said softly. What Toyo recognized was not a concept, but a direct seeing. Reality cannot be captured by explanation. The sound of one hand is not something to be produced. It is the awareness present before division, before the mind separates subject and object. This moment revealed the nature of real learning. Nothing had been solved through intelligence or effort. Insight came when striving was exhausted, when the need to succeed dissolved. Zen speaks of this as great doubt, the courage to remain completely unsure until truth can reveal itself. Humility here does not mean diminishing oneself. It means no longer placing oneself at the center. When defensiveness falls away, listening becomes possible. When the need to impress disappears, clarity arrives on its own. In a world driven by achievement and certainty, this openness can feel unsettling. We are trained to know, to conclude, to define ourselves by understanding. Yet these old stories suggest another way. Wisdom may begin where certainty ends. Each day offers the same choice. We can meet life with minds already crowded by assumptions, or we can empty them. In that emptiness, every encounter becomes a teacher. Deep in the mountains of ancient China, where mist hung among pine trees and streams carved their way through stone, lived an elderly woman whose actions revealed a sharp understanding of compassion. For more than 20 years, she supported a solitary monk, building him a hut and bringing food daily so he could devote himself entirely to meditation. Supporting practitioners was considered a noble act, a form of generosity known as dana, giving without expectation. Over time, the woman began to wonder whether the monk's practice had borne any real fruit. Had her devotion supported awakening, or had it allowed stagnation to settle in unnoticed? To find out, she arranged a test. She asked a young woman from the village to visit the monk, to embrace him suddenly, and ask what he would do. When the woman did so, the monk pushed her away and replied with cold detachment, speaking in distant imagery about winter and lifeless trees. When the old woman heard this, disappointment turned to anger. After all those years, he had shown no warmth, no recognition of another's humanity. That same day, she burned his hut to the ground. This startling act exposed a crucial distinction. The monk had cultivated detachment, but mistaken it for wisdom. True awakening does not erase feeling, it refines it. Authentic practice expresses compassion appropriate to each moment. The old woman understood that spiritual maturity includes responsiveness, not numbness. Kindness without awareness can become cruelty, disguised as discipline. In medieval Japan, within the quiet walls of a convent, lived a nun known for her sincerity and depth. Her life required courage in a society that offered women few paths beyond marriage. Her presence carried a quiet strength that some monks found unsettling. One, overwhelmed by attraction, sent her a secret letter expressing his feelings and asking to meet. She read the letter and set it aside without response. The next day, during a public teaching, she stood and addressed the monk openly, inviting him to embrace her if his feelings were sincere. Shock rippled through the hall. The monk's secret was exposed, yet no scandal followed. Instead, clarity appeared. By bringing what was hidden into the open, she dissolved its power. This was not cruelty, it was compassion rooted in honesty. Difficult emotions were not denied or indulged, but met directly. Sometimes the most caring act is to reflect reality without embellishment. pretending confusion does not exist allows it to deepen. Clear, seeing freeze. At the foot of Mount Fuji, in a small, unlocked hut, lived a master devoted to radical simplicity. He owned almost nothing and needed nothing. One evening, returning home, he found a thief searching through his few possessions. Instead of anger, he greeted the man warmly, insisting he take his clothes as a gift so he would not leave empty-handed. The thief fled in confusion, leaving the master naked beneath the moon, gazing upward. The master wished only that he could also give the moon itself. This generosity did not arise from strategy. It flowed naturally from freedom. Possession no longer defined security. Letting go had become abundance. Compassion, in these stories, takes many forms. Sometimes it challenges, sometimes it exposes, sometimes it gives without limit. What unites these responses is attunement to what each moment truly requires. In the busy port cities of a changing Japan, where foreign influence blended with ancient ritual, lived a man whose strength was legendary. His name meant great waves, and as a sumo wrestler he possessed flawless technique and immense power. Yet before a crowd, his courage vanished. In private, he was unbeatable. In public, fear overtook him. His hands shook, his breath faltered. And weaker opponents defeated him easily. As his reputation declined, desperation drove him to seek help from a Zen master staying at a nearby temple. He spoke of his fear, his failing career, his confusion. The master listened quietly, then offered simple instruction. "Your name is Great Waves," he said. "Stay here tonight and become them. You are no longer a frightened man. You are waves that swallow all obstacles." Left alone in the dim hall, the wrestler tried to imagine this. At first, his mind returned again and again to fear and strategy. Gradually, as the night deepened, something shifted. He no longer imagined waves. He felt their power rising from within, vast and unstoppable, moving with its own rhythm. As the night stretched on, the silence of the temple wrapped itself around him. The worries that had crowded his thoughts began to lose their urgency. The imagined roar of the crowd faded, replaced by a deeper sensation moving through his body. It was not excitement or aggression, but a steady force, rising and falling like the sea under moonlight. His breathing slowed. His posture softened. Without effort, the image of waves no longer felt like a picture in his mind. It felt like a lived reality. Powerful and indifferent to resistance. By the time dawn arrived, exhaustion had given way to clarity. When the master returned, he looked at the wrestler and nodded slightly, saying nothing more. Onami left the temple and returned to his training with a different presence. When he next entered the ring, the crowd was just as loud, the space just as filled with eyes and expectation. Yet something fundamental had changed. He no longer stood as a man trying to protect himself from judgment. He stood as movement itself. Victory followed naturally, not because fear had been defeated, but because it no longer held the center of attention. Zen does not teach us to erase fear or emotion. It teaches us to see what happens when identity loosens. The wrestler did not become brave by forcing confidence. He became vast. In vastness, fear shrinks without resistance. This pattern repeats across all these stories. Transformation occurs not through confrontation with inner states, but through a shift in relationship to them. When Toyo stopped chasing answers, understanding appeared. When the old woman burned the hut, she shattered complacency. When the nun spoke openly, confusion dissolved. When generosity was offered without calculation, even theft lost its meaning. In each case, the response was not guided by rule, but by immediacy. Zen points again and again to this responsiveness, alive and unfiltered. We often imagine wisdom as something accumulated over time, layered through effort. Yet these stories suggest that wisdom reveals itself when effort relaxes. It is closer to subtraction than addition. What falls away are habits of resistance, strategies of self-protection, narratives of deficiency. What remains is something simple and sufficient. In everyday life, moments arise that mirror these teachings, standing before others and feeling the familiar tightening in the chest, being misunderstood and wanting to defend, encountering someone who disrupts our expectations. Each of these moments contains the same question Toyo faced, the same invitation the wrestler received. Will we meet this experience as a problem to solve, or as something to inhabit fully? The mind prefers solutions because they promise control. Zen offers presence instead. Presence does not promise comfort, but it offers honesty. From that honesty, appropriate action emerges on its own. This is why Zen masters often appear unconcerned with outcomes. They attend to the moment, trusting that clarity is already present when interference ceases. The story of the monk whose hut was burned can feel harsh, even cruel, yet beneath the shock lies compassion that refuses to enable stagnation. The old woman did not abandon him out of anger alone. She acted from recognition that spiritual numbness can be more damaging than failure. Comfort without insight can harden into avoidance. Sometimes the kindest act is to remove what supports illusion. Similarly, the nun's boldness was not driven by pride or desire to humiliate. It was a refusal to allow hidden confusion to continue shaping behavior. By exposing it gently but clearly, she returned responsibility to where it belonged. Truth spoken without malice has the power to liberate. The master who gave away his clothes did not calculate the moral lesson of his action. He responded to the person before him, not to the idea of a thief. In doing so, he revealed a freedom that possessions could not provide. His wish to give even the moon was not poetic exaggeration. It was an expression of a heart no longer divided between self and other. In the case of the wrestler, fear dissolved not through analysis, but through expansion. When identity widened, fear no longer defined the field. This is a subtle but profound shift. We often try to eliminate what we dislike within ourselves. Zen invites us to see what happens when we stop identifying so narrowly. When we are not confined to a single role or story, inner conflict loses its grip. All these stories move in the same direction. They do not instruct in the usual sense. They gesture, they hint, they invite recognition rather than agreement. Their power lies not in explanation, but in resonance. Something in them feels familiar, as though they describe not an ideal state, but a forgotten one. This familiarity points to an awareness already functioning before judgment arises, before comparison begins, before effort tightens. Awareness does not need to be created. It needs to be trusted. When trusted, it responds appropriately, without consulting fear. In the quiet after listening, this may reveal itself as a slight easing in the body, a pause before reaction, a willingness to remain with uncertainty a moment longer. These are not small things. They are the doorway through which wisdom enters ordinary life. Zen does not separate the sacred from the mundane. Wrestling, cooking, writing letters, welcoming strangers, sitting in silence, all are expressions of the same ground. What changes is not the activity, but the presence brought to it. When presence is complete, action aligns naturally. There is no final moral drawn from these stories. They resist being reduced to lessons. Each one stands open, unfinished, like life itself. Their purpose is not to conclude, but to continue unfolding within whoever encounters them. As the sound of great waves settles back into still water, as silence follows the last question, what remains is not an answer, but a space. In that space, something essential can be felt rather than named. And from there, the next moment rises, asking only to be met as it is. As the image of waves settled into his body, the wrestler no longer felt separated from their movement. There was no longer a man imagining strength. There was only strength expressing itself, rising and falling without hesitation. Thoughts of winning or losing lost their urgency. The night passed without effort, and with the coming light, a quiet confidence remained, not as a belief, but as a felt reality. When he returned to public matches, nothing external had changed. The ring was the same. The crowd was just as loud, yet the fear that once tightened his chest now appeared like a small ripple on a vast surface. It could move, but it could not dominate. From that point on, his presence alone altered the atmosphere. Opponents sensed it before the match even began. He was no longer reacting to the crowd's energy. He was containing it. Victories followed, but they felt almost incidental. What mattered more was the freedom he experienced while standing before hundreds of watching eyes. He was no longer a person being judged. He was an event unfolding. This transformation did not come from suppressing fear or convincing himself of greatness. It came from stepping out of a narrow identity. Zen does not teach us to fight what arises within us. It teaches us to stop mistaking a passing state for who we are. When identification loosens, emotions still arise, but they no longer rule the whole field. This same movement runs through all the stories that have unfolded. Again and again, the turning point is not effort, but release. Not acquisition, but relinquishment. The professor did not gain wisdom by adding knowledge. He gained it by emptying his cup. Toyo did not answer the koan by finding the right sound. He answered it by resting in silence. The monk supported for 20 years did not fail because he felt desire. He failed because he mistook cold distance for realization. The nun did not resolve confusion by avoiding it. She resolved it by bringing it fully into the open. The master who gave away his clothes did not act from moral duty. He acted from freedom. The wrestler did not conquer fear. He outgrew it. Each story shows a different face of the same insight. Suffering tightens around identity. Freedom appears when identity softens. What makes these teachings enduring is not their drama, but their practicality. They do not belong to temples or ancient times. They appear wherever a human being pauses long enough to see what is actually happening. In moments of embarrassment, loss, desire, or fear, the same opportunity arises. We can contract around the experience, or we can let it move through a wider space. Often, the mind assumes that widening means becoming passive or weak. These stories suggest the opposite. When reaction drops away, response becomes more precise. The old woman's action was fierce, but not cruel. The nun's words were sharp, but not unkind. The master's generosity was extreme, but not reckless. The wrestler's power was overwhelming, but not aggressive. Each action fit its moment without excess. This fittingness cannot be planned in advance. It cannot be reduced to rules. It emerges from attention that is not split between defending an image and controlling an outcome, attention that is whole. Zen training in all its strange forms, points toward this wholeness. Koans frustrate the thinking mind so that attention can return to its natural state. Silence is used not to escape the world, but to meet it more directly. In daily life, this directness often feels unfamiliar. We are accustomed to rehearsing, anticipating, correcting ourselves before anything even happens. We live slightly ahead of experience or slightly behind it. Zen invites us back into the center of what is occurring now, not as an exercise, but as a way of being. When attention rests here, actions arise without the heavy burden of self-consciousness. Words come without needing to be perfect. Decisions happen without endless internal debate. Mistakes still occur, but they are met without collapse. Praise and blame pass through like weather. This does not make life flat or dull, it makes it vivid. Impermanence, so often spoken of in these stories, is no longer a threat when identity is not fixed. Change stops being something to resist and becomes something to move with. The tea overflows, the hut burns, the reputation falls apart, the crowd roars. None of these events need to define who we are. The mind may still ask how to live this way consistently. Zen offers no guarantee of consistency. It offers practice. Practice not as repetition of techniques, but as repeated willingness to return. Return to the body. Return to breathing. Return to what is actually present before thought names it. In this returning, something softens. The urge to dominate experience relaxes. Life begins to feel less like a problem to be solved and more like a process to be participated in. Even difficulty takes on a different texture. Pain remains painful, but it is no longer compounded by resistance. Confusion remains confusing, but it is no longer an enemy. These stories do not end with declarations of enlightenment. They end quietly, often without resolution. This reflects the nature of the path itself. There is no final arrival, only ongoing responsiveness. Each moment completes itself and gives way to the next. If something lingers after listening, it is not a concept to remember, but a shift in orientation, a sense that it may be possible to meet life without so much armor, that awareness itself is trustworthy, that peace does not need to be constructed from ideal conditions. The ancient teachers did not possess something others lacked. They simply stopped interfering with what was already present. Their lives became demonstrations of what happens when attention is allowed to function without obstruction. In this way, their stories are less about them and more about what is possible for anyone in any moment. As the echoes of waves, silence, fire, generosity, and courage settle, nothing needs to be concluded. The invitation remains open. Each breath offers it again. To empty the cup, to rest in not knowing, to respond without excess, to meet whatever arises as part of the same unfolding movement. In this meeting, the search for peace gradually loosens its grip, and what remains is not an achievement, but a quiet familiarity with being alive. As he yielded more fully to the movement within, the inner sea rose with greater force. What began as an image became an embodied reality. Inwardly, he was no longer a man imagining waves, but a towering surge of water lifting itself from unfathomable depths. Nothing stood in its way. Stones, shores, human constructions dissolved without resistance. The movement carried no hesitation, no doubt, no concern for how it appeared. It moved simply because that was its nature. Through the long hours of darkness, this vision intensified. The imagined waves swept through the temple, scattering flower offerings, washing over the silent Buddha figure, filling every corner with sound and motion. Walls disappeared, forms dissolved. By morning, there was no temple left at all, only the endless rhythm of rising and falling water, vast and uninterrupted. When the master found him at dawn, he was still seated, unmoving, a quiet smile resting on his face. The teacher approached without sound and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Nothing can unsettle you now," he said softly. "You are no longer facing the waves. You are the waves themselves." That very day, a wrestling tournament was to be held in the city. He entered the competition carrying a stillness he had never known. Stepping into the ring, he did not see faces evaluating him. He felt only the great surge moving through his limbs and breath. Each match unfolded effortlessly. Strength arose without strain. Balance held without calculation. By the end of the day, he had defeated every opponent with such ease that stories of his performance were repeated long after the event had passed. From that moment on, no challenger could overcome him. What he had discovered was not merely a technique or a mental trick, but something Zen has long pointed toward. When one fully inhabits their deeper nature, outer conditions lose the power to intimidate or restrict. This shift reveals a core insight of Buddhist psychology. Fear often arises from the distance between the small story we tell about ourselves and the larger reality we belong to. His difficulty was never a lack of ability. It was the belief that he was a fragile self, exposed to the opinions of others. When that belief loosened, and he sensed his connection to something immeasurable, fear had nothing left to cling to. During a later period, when Japan remained largely untouched by foreign influence and ancient ways continued undisturbed, there lived a Zen teacher in the northeastern regions whose understanding of life and death was widely known. He had spent many years training in China, receiving teachings that emphasized direct realization over doctrine. When he returned home, his clarity and warmth drew many students. As he grew older, those around him began to worry about losing him. Teachers of such depth were rare, and his blend of insight and gentle humor had shaped many lives. The thought of his eventual passing troubled them deeply. One winter day, when his hair had grown white and his movement slower, he gathered his disciples. Snow drifted quietly beyond the temple windows, and the air held the stillness that comes before deep cold. Settling himself comfortably, he told them he wished to share a story from his years of study abroad. Long ago, he said, there was an elderly master who called his students together near the end of the year. "I will not be alive next year," he told them calmly, "so you should treat me especially well during these remaining days." The disciples laughed, convinced their teacher was simply teasing. He appeared healthy, showing no sign of illness. Still, out of affection, each student took turns preparing special meals for him. On the final evening of the year, the master told them, "Tomorrow afternoon, when the snow stops falling, I will leave you." Again, they assumed he was speaking figuratively. The sky that night was clear, without a trace of snow. Yet near midnight, flakes began to fall. By morning, the ground was covered, and the snowfall continued steadily. That afternoon, the students searched for their teacher and could not find him. They checked his room, the meditation hall, the gardens. At last they discovered him seated upright in the main hall, posture perfect, breath already gone. He had passed away peacefully, just as the snow began to ease. When the old teacher finished telling this story, one of the students asked whether it was truly possible to know the moment of one's own death. "It is not necessary to demonstrate such things," he replied, "but if one wished to, it could be done." Would you like me to show you?" Unsure whether he was serious, one student nodded hesitantly. 7 days from now," the master said with a gentle smile, "I will join my teacher." Most of them dismissed the remark. As the days passed, he continued his routines as usual, showing no sign of decline. On the 7th day, he called everyone together. A week ago, he reminded them, "I said I would be leaving today. It is customary to leave a final verse, but I lack skill in poetry and calligraphy. Will one of you write down my last words?" Still uncertain, one student prepared brush and ink. Closing his eyes, the master spoke slowly. "I came from brilliance and returned to brilliance. What is this?" When the words were written, the student hesitated and said that traditional verses had 4 lines, not 3. With a sudden shout, loud and fierce, the master cried, "What is this?" And in that instant, he died. This story points to a profound understanding of life and death. For most people, death represents the ultimate loss of control, the final unknown. For one who has recognized their essential nature, death is simply another transformation. The final shout was not confusion. It was a direct expression of the mystery underlying all experience. What links this teacher and the wrestler is the same realization. Limitation arises from identifying with something too small. One believed himself a nervous competitor. The other students saw him only as a mortal man. In truth, both were expressions of something vast and enduring. This recognition, the Buddha taught, is not reserved for a few. It is available to anyone willing to look inward, not because we must become extraordinary, but because we must notice what has always been present. In daily moments of anxiety or doubt, this larger identity can be remembered. When fear appears, we can sense the deeper movement carrying us. When life feels overwhelming, we can meet it with open curiosity rather than contraction. The wisdom in these stories is not complex philosophy. It is the simple recognition that we are more than our thoughts, our circumstances, or our roles. When this is touched, even briefly, life feels less like a problem to manage and more like a living process to enter fully. In the ancient capital, where temples stood like quiet witnesses to time, a woman was born whose life would later echo through Zen history with both sorrow and insight. Her given name meant bell, a sound that carries far and then disappears, and later she would take a name meaning spring ocean, vast and restless. She came into the world during a period when a woman's path was largely decided for her, confined to marriage, obedience, and silence. Yet from an early age, it was clear she did not fit easily into those limits. Her beauty drew attention wherever she went, but it was her sharp intelligence that set her apart. People paused to watch her pass, and scholars lingered to speak with her. Surprised by the clarity and depth of her thinking, none of this protected her from the customs of her time. While still young, she was pushed into an arranged marriage that left little room for her own desires. This was not cruelty in the eyes of society, but simply the order of things. When that marriage eventually ended, she made a choice that few women of her era dared to imagine. She entered the Imperial University to study philosophy, becoming one of the first women in the country to do so. Her presence caused a stir. Admiration followed her into lecture halls and libraries, and her reputation grew quickly. Yet this visibility brought complications she had not foreseen. Wherever she went, men fell in love with her. Fellow students, professors, lay practitioners she met during visits to temples all found themselves drawn to her. What made this even more painful was that she too loved easily. Her heart responded quickly, intensely, and often. Intellectual achievement could not quiet her deeper longing. When philosophical study no longer satisfied her, she turned toward Zen practice, seeking something beyond concepts and debate. Visiting temples, sitting in meditation halls, she felt drawn toward a way of life, grounded in direct experience. At a sub-temple connected to a well-known monastery, she found not only teachings, but a sense of genuine spiritual community. The monks recognized her sincerity and dedication. Despite the attention her appearance attracted, they accepted her as a true student. One monk in particular became her guide, helping her navigate the subtle terrain of Zen training. The abbot of the monastery was a man whose name suggested silent thunder, an intensity held beneath stillness. He was known for strict discipline and unwavering standards. He had watched with concern as boundaries between monastic and lay life blurred in modern times, and he was determined to preserve what he saw as the integrity of the tradition. This severity earned him enemies, especially among those who felt constrained or judged by his rules. Tension simmered quietly within the temple. Among those who felt threatened was the head priest's wife. She saw the young woman's gifts and the respect she received and felt jealousy take root. Gradually, resentment poisoned her view, unable to tolerate what she perceived as competition or disruption. She began spreading rumors. She whispered that the relationship between student and teacher was improper, that the woman's beauty itself was corrupting the monastery. These murmurs eventually reached the abbot. Faced with accusations and pressure, he acted swiftly. Without careful investigation, he expelled both the woman and her teacher. Years of sincere practice were erased in an instant. The monk was sent away in disgrace. The woman was cast out, stunned by the injustice not only toward herself, but toward someone she believed innocent. Bitter thoughts filled her mind. If love was her mistake, she could accept that. But to watch another suffer for it felt unbearable. That night, overwhelmed by heartbreak and a fierce sense of righteousness, she took kerosene and set fire to the ancient wooden buildings. Centuries of prayer and devotion went up in flames before dawn. By morning, she was in custody. A young lawyer, moved by her story, attempted to arrange a lighter sentence. She refused his help, telling him that saving her now would only invite further acts of destruction. She was sentenced to years in prison. Even behind bars, attention followed her. Her beauty had not faded, and even the aging warden found himself drawn to her presence. When she was finally released, she discovered that freedom in name did not mean welcome. Society had no place for her. Those who preached compassion avoided her. Her family disowned her. Friends crossed the street to escape recognition. She was alone, ill, and destitute. In her darkest period, she encountered a teacher from another Buddhist tradition who spoke of boundless compassion and unconditional acceptance. Through the practice of chanting the Buddha's name, she found a measure of peace that had eluded her. It did not erase the past, but it softened her heart enough to keep living. She died young, worn down by suffering, yet still carrying a quiet dignity. Before her death, she wrote her own account, hoping others might learn from her pain. Only afterward did those who had condemned her read her words with remorse. Her life illustrates the suffering born from attachment, not only to possessions or desires, but to expectations of fairness and control. What seemed like gifts became sources of entanglement. Passion fueled brilliance, then destruction. Her inability to accept injustice pushed her toward an act that harmed many, including herself. Yet within this tragedy lies a deeper teaching. Freedom does not come from arranging life to match our wishes. It comes from cultivating an evenness of heart that remains steady amid praise and blame, pleasure and pain. Without this balance, even noble intentions can lead to ruin. Around the same era, two teachers in the city offered a contrasting lesson. One followed every rule with flawless precision, embodying discipline so strictly that others admired him as a model of correctness. The other appeared careless by comparison, eating when hungry, resting when tired, accepting wine when offered. When the disciplined teacher visited his unconventional friend and found him drinking, shock and disapproval arose immediately. The exchange that followed revealed something subtle. The one bound tightly to rules had become identified with being righteous. The other, seemingly casual, had not lost sight of the purpose behind practice. Attachment to form can become just as limiting as attachment to desire. Rules are meant to serve awakening, not replace it. When identity hardens around being correct, a live understanding can slip away unnoticed. These stories, placed side by side, point to the same truth. Whether through fear, passion, righteousness, or discipline, suffering grows when we cling too tightly to who we think we are. Release does not mean carelessness. It means remembering what practice is truly for. Tanzin's gentle laughter carried no mockery. It arose from ease rather than rebellion. He understood that forms, precepts, and disciplines are rafts meant to carry us across the river, not burdens to be worn as proof of holiness. When we cling to the raft after reaching the shore, it becomes an obstacle rather than a support. Unsho, in his devotion, had mistaken the structure for the essence, the shell for what it was meant to protect. The Zen stories return to this point again and again, not to dismiss discipline, but to free it from rigidity. Rules without wisdom become cages. Freedom without awareness becomes chaos. True practice moves between these extremes with a sensitivity that cannot be reduced to formulas. It responds to life as it actually appears. This same understanding threads through all the stories that have been told. The boy who listened for the sound of one hand did not awaken through clever answers, but through exhaustion of effort. The monk supported for decades failed, not because he lacked restraint, but because his heart had grown cold. The nun who spoke boldly in the assembly did not act from impulse, but from compassion that refused to hide behind silence. The master who gave away his clothes responded not from principle, but from immediacy. The wrestler who became waves stopped fighting his fear by trying to overcome it, and instead stepped into something larger than himself. The teacher who chose the moment of his death did not cling to life or reject it, but met it directly as another expression of what is. Even the woman whose life ended in sorrow carries this lesson in painful clarity. Her suffering was not caused simply by love or anger, but by the tightening grip of attachment around how things should be, when reality refused to conform. The force of that attachment shattered lives. Yet her later turning toward unconditional compassion revealed another possibility, one that does not depend on purity, reputation, or approval. Zen does not offer comfort by promising that life will be fair. It offers clarity by showing that fairness and unfairness arise within a larger field that is not shaken by either. When this is seen, something relaxes at the deepest level. We stop demanding that the world justify itself before we can be at peace. In daily life, these teachings do not remain abstract. They appear in small, ordinary moments. When we feel the urge to defend ourselves, to prove our correctness, to cling to our role, we are standing at the same crossroads as Unsho. When we feel tempted to burn everything down in the name of justice, we are walking beside Shunkai. When fear rises before a challenge, we are again at the edge of the ring, wondering whether we are small and fragile or vast and unmovable. Zen does not answer these moments with doctrine. It invites direct seeing. What is actually happening right now before judgment appears? What remains when stories fall silent? In that directness, something trustworthy reveals itself. This is why Zen so often speaks of beginner's mind, not as naivete, but as openness, a willingness to meet each moment without armor. When the cup is empty, tea can be poured. When the mind releases its grip, life can enter. Compassion, too, changes shape when seen from this place. It is no longer sentimental or rigid. Sometimes it comforts, sometimes it confronts, sometimes it gives everything away, sometimes it burns down what can no longer stand. But what guides it is not rule or reaction, but attunement. To live this way does not require monasteries or vows. It unfolds in kitchens, streets, workplaces, and quiet rooms at night. Each moment asks the same question, though rarely in words. Will we meet this as a fixed self defending its position, or as an open field responding to what is needed? Zen stories are not meant to be admired from a distance. They are mirrors. In them, we recognize our own fear of not knowing, our own longing to be right, our own confusion between discipline and wisdom, and occasionally we recognize our own capacity for vastness, kindness, and ease. Nothing in these stories suggests that awakening makes life neat or safe. It makes it honest. It strips away what no longer serves and leaves us face to face with the raw simplicity of being alive. In that simplicity, something profound becomes ordinary. Breathing, listening, responding. The sound of one hand was never hidden. The great waves were never absent. The brilliance Hosten spoke of was never elsewhere. They were overlooked because the mind was busy grasping at something smaller. When grasping loosens, even briefly, the world is revealed as it has always been, not divided into success and failure, purity and corruption, sacred and ordinary, but moving as a single, continuous expression. In that movement, there is room for mistakes, for sorrow, for fierce love, and for letting go. Zen does not promise redemption in the future. It points quietly to what is already here, again and again, through silence, through paradox, through lives lived honestly and imperfectly. It gestures toward the same understanding. This moment is complete, not because it is ideal, but because nothing is missing from it. When this is seen, even suffering is held differently, not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as part of the human condition, asking to be met with clarity rather than resistance. And so the stories end where they began, not with answers, but with an invitation to listen more deeply, to respond more freely, to live with a heart that is neither closed nor careless. In this way, wisdom is not accumulated. It unfolds moment by moment as naturally as breath. True freedom, these teachings suggest, does not arise from rigid obedience, nor from deliberate rebellion. It grows out of understanding. When we see why guidelines exist, we can respond to life with intelligence rather than reflex. Sometimes that response takes the form of discipline, sometimes of flexibility. What matters is never the outer shape of action, but the clarity from which it emerges. In a quiet, rural temple, there once lived a monk whose life revealed this truth in a gentle, human way. He had become a Zen teacher while still young, but unlike most monks, he carried an unusual responsibility. After his father's death, he was the sole support for his elderly mother. Monastic life offered no easy solution. Women were not permitted to live in monasteries, and yet abandoning his mother was unthinkable. Abandoning his path as a teacher was equally impossible. He chose a third way, Wherever he traveled to teach, he brought his mother with him. They lived together in modest dwellings he built himself, simple homes that held both practice and care. Because he could not rely on monastic support, he earned their living by copying sutras by hand, his calligraphy so refined that people were willing to buy it for food and shelter. When his mother desired fish, forbidden to monks, he bought it for her without hesitation. Other Buddhists criticized him, accusing him of breaking precepts. He did not argue or explain. He simply continued caring for her. Seeing the judgment directed at her son, his mother felt heavy with guilt. Eventually, she decided to become a nun herself, not from pressure, but from love. They practiced together for many years in quiet harmony. Both were gifted musicians. On full moon nights, they played together, their music drifting across fields and hills, a sound like devotion made audible. One evening, a passerby heard their playing and was deeply moved. She invited the monk to her home to perform. He accepted politely. Days later, when he thanked her in public, onlookers whispered. They learned she worked in the pleasure district and quickly condemned him for association with someone they deemed impure. While he was away teaching, his mother fell ill and died. By the time he returned, preparations for her funeral were already underway. He walked calmly to the coffin and tapped it lightly with his staff. Calling out that her son had returned, speaking in her voice, he answered himself, then replied again as her son. Turning to the gathered mourners, he declared the ceremony complete and instructed them to proceed with the burial. Years later, sensing his own death approaching, he informed his students of the exact day. He offered incense before images of his mother and his teacher, then spoke a final poem of rain ending, clouds clearing, and a full moon in a blue sky. Surrounded by chanting, he died peacefully. His life shows that freedom sometimes requires stepping outside convention to honor deeper truth. What looked like attachment to his mother became a path of compassion. That rigid rule following could never have provided. By choosing care over approval, he lived a teaching that was whole. Across all these stories, a pattern becomes visible. Attachment and freedom are not enemies. They move together. One form of attachment destroys. Another heals. One tightens into grasping. Another opens into love. The Buddha did not teach the eradication of all attachment, but the art of holding without clinging. We can love fully without demanding permanence. We can commit without rigidity. We can care deeply while allowing outcomes to unfold beyond our control. When we see that everything we have is already a gift, fear loosens its grip. This understanding opens into a broader inquiry that Zen has always pursued. What is the true nature of mind? Not the restless surface that plans and judges, but the deeper awareness that watches thoughts rise and fall without disturbance. Zen masters did not study this as theory. They lived it, because seeing the mind clearly is the end of suffering. They observed that what we call mind appears in two ways. One is busy, reactive, always narrating experience. The other is spacious, steady, untouched by the content passing through it. Awakening is not the destruction of thought, but the recognition of this deeper ground. During a period when Japan remained largely closed to outside influence, a Zen teacher lived, who embodied this openness of mind in an unexpected way. Students traveled from afar to study with him. One day, a young scholar brought him a forbidden text from another religion. Possessing such a book carried serious risk. Instead of rejecting it, the teacher asked the student to read as the words were spoken, teachings about worry, trust, seeking, and finding. The master listened with full attention. When the student finished, The teacher expressed sincere admiration, recognizing wisdom without concern for its source. Line after line, he affirmed the depth of understanding contained there. This exchange revealed a mind free from sectarian boundaries. Truth was not owned by any tradition. The awakened mind recognizes insight wherever it appears. Just as a bee finds nectar without concern for the flower's name, this same openness appears in one of the Buddha's most enduring parables. A man fleeing a tiger clings to a vine over a cliff. Another tiger waits below. Mice gnaw at the vine. In the midst of this danger, the man notices a ripe strawberry growing within reach. He eats it, tasting its sweetness fully. The teaching is simple and profound. We live suspended between past and future, regret and fear, time constantly wearing away our support. And yet, even here, there is sweetness. Beauty does not cancel danger. It coexists with it. The awakened mind does not deny reality, but it does not postpone living until safety is guaranteed. This capacity to hold fear and appreciation at once arises from resting in the deeper awareness beneath thought. From here, peace does not depend on circumstances. Another story points to the same truth through art. A master calligrapher was asked to recreate a legendary inscription. As he worked, a student stood nearby, criticizing every attempt. Under this gaze, the master's work grew constrained. Stroke after stroke fell short. When the student stepped away, the master picked up his brush and wrote freely, without self-consciousness. The result was effortless perfection. The same hand, the same skill, but a different mind. We all know the voice of that critical student. It lives inside us, judging, correcting, interfering. Zen does not silence this voice by force. It shows us that our most natural wisdom emerges when we stop obeying it. Original mind is not something to be achieved. It is what remains when we stop obscuring ourselves with fear of evaluation. Like the sky behind clouds, it has never been absent. All these stories, in their different tones, point to the same recognition. We are already what we seek. The path is not about becoming extraordinary, but about ceasing to interfere with what is already whole. When this is seen, action becomes simple, compassionate, and free, arising naturally from understanding rather than effort. True freedom, these stories quietly suggest, does not arise from rigid obedience, nor from careless rebellion. It grows from an intimate understanding of why forms exist at all, and from responding with clarity to the living moment. At times, clarity expresses itself as discipline, firm and unwavering. At other times, it appears as gentleness and adaptability. What matters is never the outer appearance of the action, but the depth of understanding from which it emerges. In a secluded rural temple in Japan, there once lived a monk named Shoan, whose life revealed another subtle layer of attachment and release. Shoan had become a Zen teacher at a young age, respected for his insight and steadiness. Yet his life unfolded differently from most monks of his era. When his father passed away, Shoan found himself responsible for caring for his aging mother, a duty he could not abandon. At that time, monasteries were almost entirely male spaces, and women were not permitted to reside within them. Shoan faced a quiet but profound dilemma. To leave his mother would violate his deepest sense of compassion. To abandon his vocation would be a denial of his calling. Rather than choosing one path and rejecting the other, he chose to walk both. Wherever he traveled to teach, he brought his mother with him. This decision shaped every aspect of his life. Unable to remain in established monasteries, Shoen built small dwellings wherever he stayed, creating humble homes that held both practice and family life. To support them, he copied Buddhist sutras by hand, each character formed with care and devotion. His calligraphy was admired, and through selling it, he earned just enough for food and shelter. When his mother wished to eat fish, which monks traditionally avoided, Shoen bought it for her without hesitation. Other practitioners criticized him openly, seeing only a breach of monastic rules. Shoen neither defended himself nor reacted. He simply continued caring for his mother, seeing the judgment directed at her son. His mother felt deep sorrow and guilt. One day she said quietly, "Perhaps I should become a nun. Then I will follow the same rules, and no one will blame you." And so she did. Mother and son practiced together for many years, sharing a life shaped by devotion and ease. Both were gifted musicians. Shoen played the harp with great sensitivity, and his mother learned alongside him. On nights when the moon was full, they would play together, their music drifting across fields and hills, soft as a prayer carried on the wind. One evening, a young woman passing by heard the sound and was deeply moved. She invited Shoen to come the following night and play for her family. Shoen accepted politely, without suspicion or hesitation. Days later, when he encountered the woman again and thanked her on the street, onlookers took notice. Learning that she worked in the pleasure district, they began to gossip and condemn him for associating with someone they judged as impure. Shoen did not respond. He continued walking his path without explanation. Sometime later, Shoen traveled to teach at a distant temple. While he was away, his mother fell ill and passed away. By the time word reached him, preparations for the funeral had already begun. Shoen arrived just as the ceremony was starting. He walked calmly to the coffin and tapped it gently with his staff. "Mother," he said, "your son has returned." From within the coffin came his own voice, speaking as his mother. "I am glad you returned safely." "I am glad too," Shoen replied, now speaking as himself. Turning to the gathered mourners, he said simply, "The ceremony is complete. You may proceed." Years later, sensing his own death approaching, Shoen gathered his students. He told them the time of his passing, then lit incense before images of his mother and his first teacher. He composed a final poem, reflecting on a life lived as sincerely as possible. As his disciples chanted softly, Shoen left his body in peace. His life showed that spiritual freedom does not always align with convention. His attachment to his mother, which some saw as a weakness, became the very ground through which compassion was expressed. By choosing love over approval, responsibility over reputation, he found a freedom that rules alone could never offer. These stories, when held together, reveal that attachment and freedom are not enemies, but partners, moving together in the slow dance of awakening. One attachment leads to suffering when it hardens into grasping. Another opens into peace when it becomes devotion without demand. The middle way lies not in having no attachments, but in holding them lightly. We can love deeply without clinging. We can care fully without insisting that life unfold according to our wishes. When we recognize that everything we have is already a gift, we discover a freedom that does not depend on circumstances. Life can then be held gently, like a butterfly resting briefly on the hand. In the mountain temples of ancient Japan, where mist rose like incense and bells echoed across valleys, Zen practitioners devoted their lives to a single inquiry. What is the true nature of mind? Not the restless mind of planning and worry, but the quiet awareness that watches thoughts arise and dissolve, like clouds passing through a wide sky. They observe that what we call mind has two layers. One is the surface mind, endlessly judging and reacting. The other is a vast, open awareness that remains untouched by the movement of thought. During the late Edo period, a Zen master named Gasan embodied this understanding with rare openness. One day, a student exposed to Western learning approached Gasan carrying a forbidden book, a Christian Bible. Possession of such a text was dangerous, yet curiosity had brought the student there. When he asked if Gasan had ever read it, the master replied simply, "Read it to me." As the student recited passages about trusting life and releasing worry, Gasan listened with the same attention he gave to Buddhist sutras. When the reading ended, he said with genuine admiration that whoever spoke those words was enlightened, or not far from it. Gasan was not concerned with labels or boundaries. He recognized truth by its fragrance, not its name. This is the mind of a beginner, open and unguarded, able to meet each moment without prejudice. Wisdom, he showed, is not owned by any tradition. The Buddha taught this same openness through a simple parable. A man fleeing a tiger hangs from a vine over a cliff. Below him waits another tiger. Mice gnaw at the vine. In the midst of terror, he notices a strawberry growing nearby. He plucks it and tastes its sweetness. The story reminds us that even surrounded by uncertainty, there is always something nourishing within reach. The awakened mind does not deny danger, but it does not miss the sweetness of the present moment. Peace arises not from escaping life, but from meeting it fully, just as it is. This ability to taste sweetness without denying danger points directly to the nature of awakened awareness. It is wide enough to include fear and beauty at the same time, spacious enough to hold uncertainty without collapsing into despair. When awareness rests in this openness, life no longer feels like a problem to be solved, but a living moment to be experienced. This is not indifference, and it is not denial. It is a quiet intimacy with what is here. In the old capital of Kyoto, where temple gardens changed color with the seasons and fallen leaves were swept away each morning only to fall again by evening, there lived a master calligrapher named Kosen. His work was admired throughout Japan, not only for its technical excellence, but for the vitality that seemed to breathe from each stroke. Kosen understood that true art does not come from the mind that calculates and compares, but from the natural mind that moves without hesitation. Long before Kosen's time, the Obaku Temple had commissioned a master to create large wooden characters to hang above its main gate. The phrase "chosen" pointed to the first principle, the fundamental truth underlying all Buddhist teaching. Those characters, carved from the original calligraphy, had become legendary. When Kosen was asked to recreate them, he accepted with humility, aware of both the honor and the responsibility. His approach was grounded in no mind, allowing the brush to move freely, guided by years of training rather than conscious effort. Yet on the day he began the work, an unexpected obstacle appeared. One of his students, assigned to prepare ink and paper, had developed strong opinions about what good calligraphy should look like. Instead of observing quietly, the student commented on every attempt. Kosen wrote the first version with care and presence. The student frowned and said it was not good. Without protest, Kosen prepared another sheet and tried again. The second attempt was judged even more harshly. Hours passed. Sheet after sheet filled the floor, each one rejected. 84 versions lay scattered around the room, all dismissed by the same confident voice. Eventually, the student stepped outside for a short while. In the sudden silence, Kosen felt his body relax. The pressure of being watched dissolved. Without thinking, without adjusting, without trying to please anyone, he lifted the brush and wrote. The movement was effortless. Decades of practice flowed through his hand without interference. When the student returned, he stopped and stared. His eyes widened, and with unmistakable certainty, he declared the final version a masterpiece. Kozen said nothing. He understood what had happened. When the critical gaze was present, his mind had been divided. Part of him was writing, and part of him was watching himself being judged. In that division, spontaneity could not fully appear. But when judgment disappeared, original mind revealed itself. This is the mind that acts without strain, the same intelligence that guides a bird through the sky or a flower toward the sun. Each of us carries a similar critic within. It comments, compares, and corrects, convincing us that we must improve ourselves before we are allowed to be at ease. Yet, the Zen teachings point again and again to a simple truth. Our deepest wisdom does not come from trying harder, but from stopping our interference. The Buddha taught that this natural mind is not something we must acquire. It is already present, quietly functioning beneath layers of commentary and self-doubt. Like the moon reflected in water, it is always whole, even when ripples distort its image. Practice is not about creating clarity, but about allowing the water to settle. When we begin to trust this deeper awareness, life softens. Actions become simpler. Words arise more naturally. We respond to situations not from fear or habit, but from an intuitive sense of what is needed. This is the freedom Zen points toward, not a freedom from responsibility or relationship, but a freedom within them. To live this way is to walk the middle path, to care deeply without clinging, to act wholeheartedly without insisting on control, to engage with the world while remaining rooted in stillness. In this balance, effort and ease are no longer opposites. They become expressions of the same quiet mind. And so, whether through a monk caring for his mother, a master recognizing wisdom beyond labels, a man tasting a strawberry in the face of death, or a calligrapher freed from judgment, the teaching remains the same. When the mind releases its grip, life reveals its natural grace. In that release, nothing essential is lost. What remains is a gentle clarity, steady and alive, meeting each moment exactly as it is. When the clouds thin, even for a moment, it becomes clear that the brightness was never absent. What these stories quietly reveal about the mind is both simple and unsettling. Whether it is the openness of a teacher who recognizes truth beyond labels, the ability to taste sweetness while danger remains, or the freedom that appears when self-judgment falls away, they all gesture toward the same recognition. The thinking mind we usually identify as ourselves is not the deepest layer of who we are. Beneath the restless surface of commentary and opinion lies a spacious awareness that is naturally calm, naturally responsive, and naturally kind. This awareness does not need to be corrected or refined. It does not require improvement. It only waits to be noticed. When we rest there, even briefly, something fundamental shifts. Our circumstances may remain complex, but we discover that we are wide enough to hold them without strain. Like the man suspended between tigers, who could still taste the sweetness of a strawberry, we begin to understand that peace does not depend on certainty. Wisdom does not require the absence of confusion. Love does not wait for conditions to become ideal. When we recognize ourselves as the open field in which experience appears, life no longer feels like an enemy to overcome. It becomes something we can meet. In the colder regions of northern Japan, where winter snows could isolate temples for long stretches of time, Zen teachers developed ways of transmitting insight that did not rely on explanation. They understood that genuine understanding rarely comes from accumulating ideas. It arises in moments of direct recognition, bypassing the analytical mind entirely. This approach, often called direct pointing, grew from the insight that the deepest truths cannot be contained in language. Words can indicate, but they cannot deliver realization. Like describing sweetness to someone who has never tasted sugar, explanations often complicate what is actually simple. Skillful teachers learned to create situations where insight could dawn on its own, quietly and unmistakably. In one secluded temple surrounded by tall pines, two brothers lived as monks. The elder was widely respected for his intellect. He had memorized countless texts, mastered philosophical debate, and could explain the most subtle doctrines with ease. The younger brother, by contrast, was plain and unremarkable. He struggled with study and had lost one eye in an accident, a condition often viewed in that era as both misfortune and karmic burden. At that time, wandering monks traveled from temple to temple, challenging resident teachers to formal debates. A monastery's reputation depended on its ability to meet these challenges. One autumn afternoon, as fallen leaves covered the ground, a confident and well-educated monk arrived, seeking debate. Normally, the elder brother would have welcomed the challenge, but he was exhausted. He asked his younger sibling to take his place, instructing him that the debate would be conducted in silence, using gestures alone. The younger brother agreed without fully understanding what was expected. Seated before the shrine, the visiting monk raised one finger, a gesture symbolizing the single truth underlying all existence. Without hesitation, the younger brother raised two fingers. Interpreting this as an understanding of Buddha and his teaching, the visitor raised three fingers to represent Buddha, the teaching, and the community. In response, the younger brother suddenly thrust a clenched fist forward. The visitor stood, bowed deeply, and left at once. Later, when questioned about what had happened, the younger brother explained angrily that he believed the visitor had insulted him by pointing out his missing eye. He thought he had responded politely, only to be further mocked, and had nearly struck the man in frustration. Meanwhile, the visitor told a different story. He praised the temple for housing a master of extraordinary depth, interpreting each gesture as a flawless expression of Buddhist truth. What this story reveals is not that one interpretation was right and the other wrong, but that authentic presence can communicate wisdom beyond intention. The younger brother acted without calculation. He responded directly, without spiritual ambition. Somehow, that immediacy conveyed more than carefully constructed ideas ever could. This is the heart of what Zen calls beginner's mind. Not ignorance, but openness. A way of meeting each moment without the weight of expectation. The Buddha himself encouraged learning from unexpected sources, reminding his students that insight can appear anywhere. In the noise of an ordinary marketplace, far from temples and rituals, another moment of awakening occurred. A Zen practitioner named Bunzan, well-trained and deeply studied, still felt something essential was missing. Walking through the crowded stalls one morning, he overheard a customer demand the best cut of meat from a butcher. The butcher replied simply that every piece he sold was the best. Nothing in his shop was inferior. At those words, something in Bunzan loosened. He saw that he had been doing exactly what the customer was doing, searching for the best experience, the highest realization, while dismissing the rest of life as inadequate. The butcher's statement revealed that such discrimination was the very barrier he had been struggling against. Every moment, just as it is, contains completeness, not because it conforms to desire, but because it is whole in itself. Awakening did not require Banzan to change his life. It required him to stop rejecting what was already here. This teaching appears again in the life of a practical teacher who understood that wisdom must show itself in daily affairs. When a student complained about his wife's stinginess, the teacher did not offer advice. Instead, he demonstrated balance by alternately clenching and opening his hand, revealing that both extremes are forms of distortion. True responsiveness moves naturally between holding and releasing. It does not cling, and it does not force openness. The insight was immediate, requiring no explanation. All of these stories point in the same direction. Awakening does not come from adding something new. It comes from seeing clearly. When we stop searching for something special, we discover that what we need has never been absent. The mind, when unburdened by fixation, knows exactly how to respond. As seasons turned in ancient temples, teachers reflected often on impermanence, not as a cause for despair, but as liberation. When we stop trying to freeze life into permanence, we begin to move with it. And in that movement, a quiet freedom appears, steady and alive, ready to meet whatever comes next. In accepting impermanence, the old teachers did not turn away from life. They leaned into it more fully. They saw that every moment carries a beginning and an ending, and that clinging to either creates unnecessary pain. When this truth is resisted, life feels like a series of losses. When it is understood, life becomes a flowing conversation, never static, never fixed, always renewing itself. During the Kamakura period, when Buddhist practice was woven deeply into daily life, there lived a nun named Essen, whose final days embodied this understanding with quiet clarity. Essen had spent her life in sincere practice, not seeking recognition or special attainment. She lived simply, attended to her duties, and cultivated a mind that did not struggle against change. As she grew older, illness gradually weakened her body. Those around her watched with concern, offering comfort and encouragement. Essen received their care with gratitude, but without fear. She did not speak of death as an enemy approaching, nor as a goal to be reached. She treated it as another visitor, arriving in its own time. When she sensed that her life was nearing its close, she informed the community calmly. There was no drama in her announcement, no attempt to hold on, no rush to leave. She asked only that her mat be placed by the window so she could see the sky. Each day she watched the light change, clouds passing, shadows moving across the floor. Students came to pay their respects, some with tears, some with questions. Essen answered gently, but she did not offer long explanations. Her presence itself was her teaching. She demonstrated that nothing needed to be added, nothing needed to be resolved. Life, just as it was unfolding, was complete. On the morning of her death, she sat upright, adjusted her robes, and composed a short verse. It did not speak of attainment or liberation. It spoke of seasons passing and returning, of the body, like morning dew, appearing briefly before vanishing. When she finished, she smiled faintly and closed her eyes. Her breath slowed, then stopped, as naturally as a candle flame fading when the wax is spent. Those who witnessed her passing felt not despair, but a strange stillness. It was as if her calm acceptance had spread through the room, leaving behind a quiet confidence. Death, in that moment, did not feel like a rupture. It felt like completion. This is what the Zen teachers meant when they spoke of freedom. Not freedom from birth and death, but freedom within them. Not escaping change, but moving with it so fully that resistance dissolves. When we stop arguing with impermanence, something in us relaxes. We no longer demand that moments last longer than they do. We no longer fear their ending as a personal failure. Impermanence, seen clearly, becomes a source of tenderness. Because nothing remains, everything matters. Each meeting is precious. Each breath carries a subtle urgency. Not the urgency of panic, but of presence. When we know that nothing can be held, we begin to hold life more gently. This gentleness does not make us passive, it makes us responsive. We act when action is needed. We rest when rest is appropriate. We grieve when loss arrives, but we do not turn grief into a permanent identity. Emotions are allowed to rise and fall, like weather passing through an open sky. The Zen masters understood that suffering often comes not from pain itself, but from resistance to pain. When we insist that things should not change, that people should not leave, that bodies should not age, we place ourselves in constant conflict with reality. Practice, in its simplest form, is learning to stop fighting what cannot be controlled. This does not mean we become indifferent. Compassion grows precisely because we see how fragile everything is. Knowing that time is limited, we listen more carefully. We forgive more readily. We waste less energy on resentment and regret. Awareness of impermanence sharpens our love rather than dulling it. Across all these stories, from monks and nuns to butchers and calligraphers, a single thread runs quietly beneath the surface. Awakening is not about becoming someone else. It is about recognizing what has always been present beneath our striving. The mind that knows how to respond is already functioning. The heart that knows how to care is already open. Zen does not ask us to reject the world. It invites us to meet it directly, to see clearly, to act simply, to let go when holding tight no longer serves, to hold firm when steadiness is needed. This balance cannot be memorized. It must be lived. In everyday life, impermanence appears constantly, in the way a conversation shifts, in how moods change, in the rise and fall of energy. Practice is not separate from these movements. It is found within them. Each time we notice ourselves clinging, we are given a chance to soften. Each time we notice ourselves withdrawing, we are given a chance to re-engage. The old teachers did not promise that this path would remove sorrow. They understood too well that loss is woven into existence. What they offered instead was a way of meeting sorrow without being crushed by it. When the heart is no longer clenched, sorrow can pass through without leaving bitterness behind. In this way, impermanence becomes not a threat but a teacher. It reminds us to stay awake, to stay connected, to live fully in the only place life ever appears, this moment. When we stop postponing our presence, waiting for better conditions, we discover that life has been waiting patiently for us all along. Nothing in these teachings demands belief. They ask only for attention, to notice what is happening now, to observe how grasping tightens the body and how letting go releases it, to feel directly the difference between resisting change and flowing with it. When this is seen, even briefly, something fundamental shifts. We no longer live as if we are standing outside of life, trying to manage it. We find ourselves inside it, participating fully, breathing, responding, letting go. And in that participation, quiet and unremarkable, the freedom the Zen masters spoke of reveals itself, not as a dramatic breakthrough, but as a steady ease, a willingness to meet what comes and to release what goes, trusting that nothing essential is ever truly lost. In this trust, life no longer feels like a problem to be solved. It feels like a rhythm to be joined. The Zen masters did not stand apart from the flow of events, commenting from a safe distance. They stepped directly into the current, allowing themselves to be shaped by it, moment by moment. What they discovered was not chaos, but an underlying harmony that becomes visible only when resistance fades. Impermanence, when fully accepted, reveals something unexpected. Because everything is always changing, nothing is ever truly stuck. No state of mind, no emotional storm, no painful circumstance has the power to remain forever. This realization loosens the grip of despair. Even in difficulty, there is movement. Even in sorrow, there is space. The teachings that emerged from ancient temples were never meant to be locked in stories or preserved as sacred relics. They were meant to be lived in kitchens and marketplaces, in illness and aging, in love and loss. Zen did not arise to explain life, but to meet it directly, without filters. This is why so many Zen stories unfold in ordinary settings. A butcher at his stall, a monk caring for his mother, a teacher lifting a hand, or writing a single character. Awakening was never confined to meditation cushions or mountain retreats. Those were simply places where people learned to listen more carefully. Once listening was established, every place became a teacher. When we begin to see in this way, daily life changes texture. Washing dishes becomes a complete activity, not a distraction from something more important. Walking becomes enough. Breathing becomes intimate. We stop rushing toward imagined futures and start noticing the quiet richness of what is already here. The thinking mind may protest. It wants guarantees. It wants permanence. It wants certainty. Zen does not try to silence this mind by force. It simply refuses to obey it unquestioningly. Thoughts are allowed to appear and disappear, like sounds passing through an open window. They no longer define the limits of who we are. Gradually, identification shifts. We stop believing we are the anxious voice in the head or the fearful tightening in the chest. We begin to recognize ourselves as the awareness that notices these experiences. This awareness is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It has been present through every moment of joy and every moment of pain. When this recognition deepens, fear loses its authority. Fear may still arise, but it is no longer mistaken for truth. It becomes another passing visitor. Another wave on the surface of a much deeper ocean. The ocean does not struggle against waves. It contains them. From this place, compassion flows more naturally. When we see our own thoughts and emotions as transient, we begin to see others the same way. We no longer reduce people to their worst moments or cling to idealized versions of them. We allow them to change, just as we allow ourselves to change. This does not make relationships easier in the superficial sense. It makes them more honest. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. Care becomes less about control and more about responsiveness. We show up fully, knowing that nothing can be held forever. The Zen path does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. And clarity, though sometimes uncomfortable, brings relief. When illusions fall away, we stop exhausting ourselves trying to maintain them. We rest in what is simple, direct, and real. Again and again, the teachings return to this simplicity. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing essential is missing. The mind that seeks peace is already surrounded by it, like a fish searching for water. The only obstacle is the habit of looking elsewhere. Practice, then, is not accumulation. It is subtraction. Letting go of unnecessary tension. Letting go of stories about how things should be. Letting go of the belief that freedom exists somewhere other than here. Each moment offers the same invitation to soften, to notice, to respond honestly. Sometimes the response is action. Sometimes it is stillness. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is gratitude. None of these are mistakes. When we live this way, even uncertainty loses its sharp edge. We stop demanding that life makes sense before we participate in it. We step forward without full knowledge, trusting the ground that appears beneath each step. The Zen masters were not special beings untouched by fear or doubt. They were humans who learned to stop turning fear into an enemy and doubt into a barrier. They allowed experience to be exactly what it was. And in doing so, discovered a freedom that did not depend on conditions. This freedom is quiet. It does not seek attention. It does not need to be defended. It expresses itself in ordinary kindness, in patience, in the ability to remain present, even when things fall apart. In the end, Zen does not point toward an extraordinary life. It points toward a fully lived one, a life where nothing is excluded, where joy is welcomed without clinging, where sorrow is met without collapse, where change is recognized not as a failure, but as the very movement of life itself. When we see this, the teachings no longer belong to the past. They become immediate, alive. They speak through our own experience, reminding us gently, again and again, that what we are seeking has never been elsewhere. Isun had given her entire adult life to Zen, shaving her head while still young, and stepping fully onto a path that offered little security and no social approval. Decades of disciplined practice refined her understanding until, by her 60s, her insight into the nature of reality had become steady and unmovable. For Buddhist nuns in medieval Japan, such dedication required unusual strength. Women were expected to marry, bear children, and remain within narrowly defined roles. To choose monastic life was to step outside accepted norms and endure constant scrutiny. Those who made this choice were forced to demonstrate again and again that their realization was no less profound than that of male practitioners. Isun did more than meet these expectations. She surpassed them, earning respect for a depth of understanding that could not be ignored. As her later years approached, she began to reflect on death, not with dread, but with clarity. In Buddhist understanding, death is not separate from practice. It is the moment that reveals whether impermanence has been understood in the marrow, or merely admired from a distance. Those still clinging to permanence resist the ending. Those who truly see the transient nature of all things meet it without disturbance. When Isun sensed that her life was nearing its close, she decided that her death itself would become her final teaching. One clear autumn day, she asked several monks to stack firewood in the temple courtyard. They obeyed, uncertain and uneasy. When the wood was arranged, Isun stepped calmly into the center and seated herself in flawless meditation posture. Her body was relaxed, her breath unhurried, her expression serene. She then instructed the monks to light the fire. The request shocked them. They protested, unable to reconcile what they were hearing with everything they had learned about compassion and care for life. Yet Isun was resolute. She understood that death was already approaching, regardless of preference. Rather than waiting for illness or decline, she chose to meet it directly, without avoidance. Her intention was not self-destruction, but demonstration. She wished to show, in the most unmistakable way, how fear arises from attachment. Reluctantly, the monks set the fire. As flames grew around her, one cried out, asking whether the heat was unbearable. Esun replied calmly that such a concern belonged only to someone still confused about where suffering truly resides. Soon after, she passed away, remaining composed until the end. Her words were not meant as cruelty. They pointed toward a deeper truth. When identity is bound entirely to the physical body, sensations dominate experience. Heat, cold, pain, then pleasure become overwhelming. When identity shifts to awareness itself, sensations lose their authority. They still arise, but they no longer define the core of who we are. Esun's death illustrated that freedom from fear does not come from belief in rescue or promises of continuity. It comes from understanding impermanence so completely that clinging dissolves. This does not produce indifference. It gives rise to what Buddhism calls sacred indifference, the ability to care deeply while holding everything lightly. Life is loved fully, without denial of its temporary nature. In secluded mountain monasteries, where seasons passed with stark clarity, monks learned this lesson by watching nature itself. Spring emerged from winter without hesitation. Summer ripened into fullness. Autumn released its colors, and winter stripped the landscape bare. What appeared to end was always becoming something else. These rhythms quietly taught that change is not loss, but transformation. Soyen Shaku, who would later carry Zen teachings beyond Japan, embodied this understanding throughout his life. From an early age, he related to time with unusual reverence, sensing its preciousness. His daily conduct became a living expression of impermanence, understood rather than feared. He established simple rules and followed them faithfully. Each morning began with incense and meditation before dressing. Meals were taken at regular times, never to excess. Guests were received with the same presence as solitude, and solitude was held with the same care as company. Speech was monitored carefully, and words were practiced through action. Opportunities were embraced, but never without reflection. He advised releasing regret for the past while remaining attentive to what lies ahead. Courage was balanced with tenderness. At night, sleep was entered as if it might be the final rest. In the morning, the bed was left behind without hesitation, like an object already worn out. These guidelines reveal how awareness of impermanence transforms ordinary living. When life is known to be finite, each action becomes deliberate. Attention deepens, not from anxiety, but from appreciation. Even simple acts carry weight and meaning. Engagement and non-attachment coexist naturally here. Life is met fully, yet without grasping. Experience is honored, but not clung to. Each moment is complete in itself, needing no guarantee of continuation. This way of living reflects a quiet practice of dying and being reborn every day. The day is released at night. The morning is entered fresh, unburdened by what has already passed. In this rhythm, life flows without accumulation. Another story reveals how impermanence reshapes grief. A Tendai priest once lost his wife after a long illness. Seeking to support her passage, he requested the recitation of sutras. When told that the merit would benefit all beings, he grew uneasy, fearing that others might receive what he wished for her alone. His response, tinged with humor, revealed how attachment narrows the heart in moments of loss. Though he understood compassion intellectually, grief contracted his view, yet this contraction itself reflected love. Wisdom does not erase such responses instantly. It slowly teaches how to love without possession, how to wish well without control. Impermanence, when fully understood, does not diminish love. It refines it. Each moment of connection becomes precious, precisely because it cannot be held. What ends reveals what continues beneath all change. The deepest teaching is not that everything passes, but that everything is continually beginning. Each breath, each meeting, each heartbeat arrives once and never again. Awareness of this brings tenderness and peace at the same time. Rooted in this understanding, one can remain stable while everything changes. Thoughts, emotions, and forms move like leaves in the wind, while awareness remains like the tree itself, grounded and unmoved. From this place, life is lived fully, and death becomes simply another movement within an endless unfolding. Gisho's life unfolded within this same atmosphere of quiet endurance and unwavering intent. Entering monastic life at the age of 10, she stepped into a world that demanded far more from women than from men. Nunneries were often underfunded, overlooked, and regarded as lesser places of practice. Female practitioners were expected to demonstrate not only sincerity but exceptional resolve, simply to be acknowledged as serious seekers. For Gisho, these conditions did not weaken her commitment, they sharpened it. For 16 years, she traveled across Japan, moving from teacher to teacher, absorbing teachings, enduring long periods of discipline, and refining her understanding through relentless practice. She listened carefully, sat endlessly, and carried teachings from one monastery to the next, like embers protected from the wind. Yet despite her effort and sincerity, something essential remained just out of reach. Insight did not arrive in the way she expected. Awakening did not announce itself as a reward for perseverance. This prolonged striving revealed a subtle trap familiar to many devoted practitioners. The very effort to attain realization can become another form of attachment. Practice turns into accumulation. Experiences are collected. Understanding is measured. Progress is evaluated. Without noticing, the seeker begins chasing enlightenment as though it were an object to possess rather than a truth to recognize. Eventually, exhausted by years of seeking, Gisho returned to a convent and settled into a quieter rhythm. She continued to practice, but something had shifted. The urgency to arrive somewhere softened. The relentless comparison between where she was and where she thought she should be began to loosen. Days passed without dramatic insight, yet her presence grew simpler, more transparent. One afternoon, while engaged in an ordinary task, realization dawned without ceremony. There was no thunder, no vision, no confirmation from a teacher. The boundary she had spent years trying to cross simply dissolved. What she had been searching for revealed itself as what had always been present. The effort to awaken fell away, and with it, the sense of separation between seeker and sought. This moment taught a quiet lesson. Awakening is not manufactured by effort. Though effort prepares the ground, it appears when grasping ceases. Gisho did not gain something new. She recognized something timeless. The clarity she sought had never been absent. Only the habit of striving had obscured it. Her story echoes throughout Zen literature as a reminder that wisdom cannot be accumulated like knowledge. It must be embodied. Practice refines perception, but realization arrives when the self doing the refining relaxes its grip. This theme returns again and again in Zen teachings. The mind longs to secure certainty, to reach a final understanding that will never be shaken. Zen offers something different. It invites a trust in openness, a willingness to remain intimate with not knowing. In this openness, life reveals itself directly, without mediation. Impermanence plays a central role here. When everything is recognized as transient, fixation loses its foundation. Identity softens. The self becomes less rigid. Experience flows more freely. Rather than clinging to forms, attention rests in awareness itself, which remains unchanged even as forms dissolve. This does not mean withdrawing from the world. On the contrary, life is met more fully. Joy is felt without fear of its ending. Sorrow is allowed without resistance. Neither is held too tightly. Each passes through like weather, leaving no permanent trace. Zen repeatedly points toward this intimacy with change. The practitioner is invited to observe how everything arises and fades without intervention. Thoughts come and go. Emotions swell and recede. The body ages, moment by moment. Within this constant movement, something remains steady, quietly observing. When identification shifts to this observing awareness, fear loses its central role. Fear depends on the belief that something essential is at risk. When awareness is known as unbroken, even loss no longer threatens the core of being. Pain may occur, grief may arise, but collapse does not follow. This understanding transforms how one relates to others. Possessiveness loosens, expectations soften. Love becomes less about securing permanence and more about honoring presence. Relationships breathe more freely when they are not burdened with the demand to last unchanged. Zen. Stories often highlight this freedom through simple gestures rather than grand declarations. A teacher answers with silence. A master responds with laughter. A single action conveys what words cannot. Meaning is transmitted not through explanation, but through resonance. The story of Subhuti under the flowering tree illustrates this wordless transmission. His realization of emptiness was so complete that even his silence spoke. The falling blossoms did not reward effort, they expressed harmony. When resistance ends, life responds naturally. Emptiness, in this sense, is not absence. It is openness. It allows everything to appear without fixation. Because nothing is fixed, everything is possible. Because nothing is owned, nothing is lost. This understanding frees the practitioner from the burden of self-concern. Actions arise from responsiveness rather than calculation. Life is lived from the inside out, guided by direct perception instead of rigid belief. The stories of Ezun, Soyen, Gisho, and Subhuti all point toward this same realization, though expressed in different forms. Each reveals a way of meeting impermanence without fear. Each demonstrates that freedom is not found by escaping life, but by entering it fully. Practice, then, becomes an ongoing conversation with change. Each moment invites presence. Each ending invites release. Each beginning invites curiosity. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is held permanently. In this way, Zen does not promise safety. It offers intimacy. It does not remove uncertainty. It teaches how to rest within it. When this resting becomes natural, life unfolds without the constant need for reassurance. Ultimately, impermanence reveals not fragility, but resilience. Because nothing is fixed, nothing is trapped. Because everything changes, renewal is always possible. When this truth is lived rather than merely understood, even the most ordinary moment carries quiet depth. This is not a state to achieve. It is a way of seeing that gradually matures. With patience, sincerity, and gentle persistence, the illusion of separation thins. What remains is simple awareness, meeting each moment exactly as it is, complete and sufficient, without grasping and without fear. As this way of seeing settles, the sharp boundary between practice and life dissolves. There is no longer a sense of entering or leaving something sacred. The sacred is recognized in ordinary gestures, in the way the body moves through space, in the tone of a single breath. What once felt fragmented gathers into a quiet coherence. Nothing special is added. What falls away is the habit of division. In this coherence, effort becomes gentler. Discipline remains, but it is no longer driven by anxiety or ambition. Sitting, walking, working, and resting arise from the same source. Attention does not tighten around results. It relaxes into process. Practice is no longer something done to become different. It is the expression of what is already true. Impermanence continues to teach, but now it teaches without drama. Change is noticed as texture rather than threat. Aging is felt as movement rather than loss. Even pain, when it appears, is met with curiosity instead of resistance. The mind learns to stay present without immediately constructing stories around what is happening. This presence reveals a subtle joy that does not depend on circumstances. It is not excitement. It is not pleasure. It is a quiet appreciation that comes from being intimate with experience as it unfolds. This joy can coexist with sadness, fatigue, or uncertainty. It does not require their absence. From this place, ethical conduct arises naturally. When separation softens, harm feels less appealing. Kindness does not need to be cultivated as a moral ideal. It emerges as a direct response to seeing clearly. When others are recognized as expressions of the same changing process, compassion becomes the most reasonable response. Zen does not frame this as perfection. Old habits still surface. Confusion still appears. The difference is that these movements are no longer taken personally. They pass through awareness without defining it. Failure loses its sting. Success loses its intoxication. This is why Zen teachings often resist explanation. Words tend to solidify what is fluid. They create concepts where direct experience is needed. Stories, gestures, and silence are used instead, not to obscure meaning, but to prevent fixation. Even so, the teachings leave traces. They echo in memory, offering orientation rather than instruction. They point without insisting. They invite without commanding. Each practitioner must verify them through lived experience. Time plays a curious role here. On one hand, there is deep patience. Understanding cannot be rushed. On the other hand, there is urgency. Each moment matters precisely because it will never return. These two attitudes coexist without conflict. Patience prevents forcing. Urgency prevents postponement. This balance shapes how one meets difficulty. Challenges are not seen as obstacles to practice, but as practice itself. Illness, conflict, disappointment, and loss become teachers when they are not rejected. They reveal attachments that might otherwise remain hidden. Impermanence exposes where clinging still operates. When something threatens to leave, fear points directly to where identity has settled too narrowly. This is not a failure. It is information. Each contraction offers an opportunity to soften again. Over time, trust develops, not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in responsiveness. Whatever arises can be met. Whatever passes can be released. Life is no longer approached as something to manage, but as something to participate in fully. This participation is intimate and unguarded. It does not guarantee comfort. It offers authenticity. When emotions arise, they are allowed their full expression without being acted out unconsciously. When joy appears, it is enjoyed without being hoarded. When sorrow comes, it is honored without collapsing into it. Death, seen from this perspective, loses its absolute finality. It is understood as the most dramatic expression of a process that has been unfolding all along. Each moment ends, each moment begins. Death is not separate from life. It is life-changing form completely. This understanding does not eliminate grief. Grief is a natural response to parting. What changes is the way grief is held. It is allowed to move, to breathe, to transform. It is not resisted. Nor is it used to reinforce stories of injustice or permanence violated. As this relationship to impermanence deepens, the sense of self becomes more spacious. Identity is no longer confined to roles, histories, or expectations. It is experienced as open awareness, temporarily expressing itself through a particular body and personality. This openness brings humility. There is less need to be right, to defend, to impress. Listening deepens. Silence becomes comfortable. Responses slow down, not from hesitation, but from attunement. The world is encountered more directly. Colors appear brighter. Sounds feel closer. Touch becomes more vivid. These are not altered states, but natural consequences of attention unburdened by constant commentary. In this simplicity, gratitude arises without effort. Not gratitude for specific conditions, but gratitude for being able to experience at all. Even difficulty is included, not because it is pleasant, but because it reveals the depth of aliveness. Zen does not claim ownership over this way of being. It recognizes it as universal. The teachings simply point toward what is already available to anyone willing to look honestly and patiently. As stories of masters and practitioners circulate, they serve not as ideals to imitate, but as mirrors. Each story reflects a facet of what is possible when attachment loosens and clarity deepens. No single story is complete. Together, they form a constellation rather than a map. Ultimately, the invitation is simple: to notice what is happening now, to see how it changes, to observe without immediately grasping or rejecting. Again and again, this noticing returns awareness to itself. In this return, there is rest. Not the rest of sleep or withdrawal, but the rest of being at home in experience. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Nothing needs to be secured. Life continues to move. Bodies age, relationships shift. Circumstances turn. Within all of this movement, awareness remains steady, not as an object, but as the space in which all objects appear. When this is recognized, even briefly, something fundamental relaxes. The search quiets. The sense of lack diminishes. What remains is simple presence, meeting each moment as it comes, complete in its impermanence, whole in its passing. What unfolded next in her life was not the acquisition of something new, but the quiet collapse of a long-standing misunderstanding. All those years of travel, study, discipline, and endurance had not been wasted, yet they had subtly obscured what was closest. She had believed realization lay at the far end of effort, hidden behind ever more refined understanding. What finally revealed itself was that effort itself had become a veil. The clarity she touched was intimate and unremarkable, so near that it could only be missed by searching. Her teachers had sharpened her intellect, strengthened her concentration, and refined her resolve, but it was the uncompromising severity of her final training that stripped away her last refuge. Every strategy her mind produced was patiently dismantled. Each answer collapsed under scrutiny. Over time, the cleverness that once sustained her became exhausted. When nothing was left to rely on, something else stood revealed, not as an achievement, but as a fact that had never depended on effort. The verse written in her honor was both praise and warning. It acknowledged the depth of her realization while refusing to let it settle into complacency. Awakening was not treated as an endpoint, but as a threshold. Beyond it lay a life of continuous testing, where understanding must prove itself in action, relationship, and responsibility. Insight, once seen, demanded embodiment. This spirit shaped the way she later guided others. Her teaching carried no indulgence for spiritual vanity. She recognized how easily insight hardens into identity, how quickly realization can become something to protect. The blows she had endured were transformed into clarity, and that clarity expressed itself as fierce compassion. She asked her students not to collect answers, but to surrender the need for them. Another voice from the tradition echoes the same simplicity. An old master, already deep into his later years, answered a student who believed emptiness meant possession of nothing. The exchange was brief, almost playful, yet devastatingly precise. The idea of having nothing was revealed as just another thing held tightly. Even absence had become an object of attachment. The instruction was not to destroy it dramatically, but to see through it completely. Sometimes concepts cannot be dropped directly. They must be carried until their weight becomes obvious. Only then do they fall away naturally. In this way, practice unfolds less as forceful removal and more as maturation. What once seemed essential simply loses relevance. Awareness remains unchanged throughout, quietly witnessing each stage of misunderstanding and release. Across these stories, a single insight repeats itself without repetition. What is sought has never been absent. The effort to arrive somewhere else has been happening within the very space one hopes to reach. When this is seen, striving relaxes. Practice continues, but its motivation shifts. It is no longer fueled by deficiency, but by intimacy. This intimacy transforms how life is lived. Actions become responsive rather than reactive. Choices arise from clarity instead of fear. Even extraordinary freedom begins to appear ordinary. It expresses itself not through dramatic gestures, but through appropriateness. The right response appears without calculation, shaped by conditions rather than concepts. In times governed by rigid social expectations, this freedom could appear unsettling. Those who lived from it often violated convention without intending to rebel. Their behavior followed a different logic, one rooted in human need rather than social form. This difference becomes clear in a story where grief, guilt, and imagination intertwine. A man, bound by love, made a promise in the shadow of loss. The vow was sincere, yet born from fear. When life inevitably moved on, his own divided heart gave shape to his conflict. What haunted him was not an external force, but unresolved attachment taking form. The ghost knew only what he knew. It appeared omniscient because it lived within the boundaries of his own memory. The simple test offered to him did not rely on ritual or belief. It relied on direct seeing. When the ghost could not answer what lay beyond his awareness, the illusion dissolved. What vanished was not a spirit, but a fixation. Once guilt lost its narrative power, peace returned naturally. The mind, no longer feeding the image, allowed it to disappear. Here again, Zen did not argue against the experience. It revealed its source. The aim was not to deny emotion, but to see how emotion creates worlds. When this is understood, even deeply convincing inner dramas lose their authority. A very different expression of the same clarity appears in the life of a man entrusted with great responsibility. His proximity to power never altered his simplicity. Wealth passed through his hands without leaving a trace. What mattered to him was not ownership, but use. Resources existed to relieve suffering, not to reinforce status. When given money for his own comfort, he redirected it instinctively. His explanation revealed a view where boundaries between self and others had softened. Children in need were not strangers. They belonged to the same field of care. The gesture was not meant to impress or challenge authority. It flowed naturally from how he saw the world. What surprised those around him was not generosity itself, but its lack of self-consciousness. There was no calculation of merit, no performance of virtue. Giving was simply the appropriate response to conditions. Appearances mattered less than warmth. Dignity was found in action, not attire. Through all these accounts, a quiet consistency emerges. Wisdom is not defined by withdrawal from life, nor by mastery of ideas. It reveals itself in how one responds to what is directly in front of them. Sometimes it speaks through silence, sometimes through humor, sometimes through actions that disrupt expectation. Again and again, the teaching returns to the same place. Awareness is already whole. Confusion arises when it forgets itself in its own movements. Practice is the art of remembering, not by force, but by intimacy. When remembering becomes stable, life itself becomes the expression. Nothing mystical needs to be added. Nothing human needs to be removed. The flower shower does not begin at realization. It has always been falling. What changes is the willingness to look up, to feel the petals touch the skin, and to recognize that this, exactly as it is, has never been separate from what we are. From this point onward, the stories no longer feel separate. They begin to echo one another, as if different voices are circling the same silent center. What changes from one account to the next is not the truth being pointed to, but the angle from which it is revealed. Sometimes it appears through rigor, sometimes through humor, sometimes through generosity that defies social logic. Yet beneath these variations, the movement is the same. When clarity matures, it expresses itself effortlessly in relationship. There is no longer a sharp distinction between inner realization and outer conduct. Insight naturally shapes behavior, not through moral obligation, but through resonance. When one sees clearly, acting otherwise would feel discordant, like forcing the body into an unnatural posture. This is why truly awakened individuals often appear unconventional. They are not bound by habit or expectation. Their responses arise from direct contact with the situation itself, not from rehearsed principles. What appears shocking or improper to others is often simply what the moment requires. In traditional societies, where roles and hierarchies are tightly defined, this freedom can be misunderstood. People expect consistency with established norms. But wisdom responds to reality, not to rules. When compassion is alive, it does not pause to calculate appearances. This responsiveness also reshapes how one relates to authority. Respect remains, but it is no longer rooted in fear. Status does not hypnotize awareness. A king and a beggar are met with the same clarity, the same unguarded presence. What differs is only the form of response, shaped by circumstances rather than by hierarchy. Such freedom is not rebellious. It is deeply aligned. It flows with what alleviates suffering and supports balance. Where resources are needed, they move. Where silence is appropriate, words fall away. Where firmness is required, it appears without aggression. Over time, this way of being simplifies life. Decisions become less burdened. Regret loosens its grip. The past is not erased, but it no longer dominates. Memory becomes a tool rather than a prison. The future is considered, but not clung to. Planning happens without anxiety. This does not mean uncertainty disappears. It means uncertainty is no longer interpreted as failure. Not knowing becomes a space of openness rather than threat. Questions are allowed to remain unanswered without urgency. Curiosity replaces control. In this openness, even long-held emotional patterns begin to soften. Guilt loses its authority. Fear is seen as a sensation rather than a command. Desire is felt without immediately turning into grasping. Aversion arises and dissolves without solidifying into rejection. The mind learns to trust awareness itself rather than its narratives. Thoughts continue to appear, but they are recognized as movements, not truths. Emotions still surge, but they are met as weather rather than identity. This shift is subtle but profound. What once felt personal becomes impersonal without becoming cold. Suffering is still acknowledged, but it is no longer owned. Joy is still experienced, but it is not claimed. Life flows through rather than being possessed. From here, teaching takes on a different form. Words are used sparingly. When they are used, they are meant to disrupt fixation rather than build belief. A sentence may unsettle more than it explains. A gesture may reveal more than a discourse. Students often struggle with this at first. The mind wants certainty, structure, and reassurance. But the teaching points away from dependence. It invites each person to stand on their own direct, seeing guidance is offered, but responsibility is not removed. This is why Zen training has always emphasized verification. Insight must be lived, not merely understood. No explanation, however eloquent, can substitute for experience. Each person must encounter the truth in their own body, breath, and relationships. Even after realization, refinement continues. Subtle attachments reveal themselves. Preferences hide in unexpected places. Identity reforms around insight if vigilance relaxes. Practice remains necessary, not to achieve something new, but to remain honest. This honesty expresses itself in humility. There is less interest in claiming attainment. Comparison loses relevance. One no longer measures progress against others. The path is walked without reference to destination. In this way, awakening is both deeply personal and entirely impersonal. It happens through a particular life, with its unique conditions and challenges. Yet what is realized is universal, not owned by anyone. Stories endure because they offer glimpses of this universality through human detail. They remind us that wisdom does not belong to a single era, gender, or role. It appears wherever sincerity meets willingness to see. As these stories circulate, they do not ask to be believed, they ask to be contemplated, tasted, tested against lived experience. Their value lies not in their historicity, but in their capacity to turn attention inward. When listened to deeply, they loosen certainty. They invite silence. They create pauses where insight can slip in unnoticed. Often, the most important moment is not when a story ends, but when the mind stops commenting on it. In that pause, something familiar yet overlooked becomes clear. Awareness recognizes itself without announcement. There is no fireworks, no revelation to report, just a quiet sense of alignment, as if something long out of place has settled. Life continues much as before. Responsibilities remain. Relationships still require care. Difficulties do not vanish. Yet, the way they are held changes. There is more space around each experience, more room to breathe. From this space, gratitude arises without cause. Not gratitude for circumstances, but for the simple fact of experiencing. Even discomfort is included. Even uncertainty is welcomed. This inclusion marks a profound shift. Nothing is excluded from practice. Nothing is pushed outside the path. Ordinary life becomes the field of realization, moment by moment. In this field, the boundary between sacred and mundane dissolves. Cooking, cleaning, speaking, listening, resting, and working all carry the same potential. No moment is privileged. No moment is wasted. What remains is attentiveness, a willingness to meet what is here without distortion, a readiness to let go when holding tight is no longer appropriate, a trust that awareness does not disappear when forms change. This trust deepens slowly, almost imperceptibly. It is built not on belief, but on repeated recognition. Again and again, awareness proves stable. Again and again, experience changes without harming it. Eventually, this stability becomes so familiar that it no longer feels like an achievement. It feels like home, not a place to retreat to, but a ground from which to engage fully. From here, compassion flows without effort, not as obligation, but as recognition. Others are seen not as separate struggles, but as variations of the same movement. Helping does not feel heroic. It feels natural. In this naturalness, the teachings quietly fulfill their purpose. They return the seeker to what was never missing. They dissolve the drama of attainment. They reveal that what was sought through years of effort is present in this very breath. And so the stories continue, not as relics of the past, but as living mirrors. Each one reflects a different face of the same truth, waiting patiently for the moment when the listener is ready to see. As this recognition stabilizes, there is a subtle but unmistakable shift in how time is experienced. The past no longer presses forward with the same authority, and the future loosens its grip. Moments are no longer stepping stones towards something else. Each one stands complete, requiring no justification beyond its own presence. Life is not endured in order to arrive. It is lived because it is here. This does not create passivity. On the contrary, engagement becomes more precise. When action is needed, it arises cleanly. When restraint is appropriate, it holds without tension. There is less inner debate, less second-guessing. Decisions are made from contact rather than from fear of consequence. What dissolves most noticeably is the sense of separation, not in a mystical or dramatic way, but in the ordinary details of daily interaction. Listening becomes deeper because the urge to prepare a response weakens. Speaking becomes simpler because there is less need to defend a position. Even disagreement loses its sharp edge. Differences are seen without turning into division. In this atmosphere, relationships transform. They are no longer used to confirm identity or fill absence. They become places of shared presence. Love expresses itself less as possession and more as appreciation. Care flows without demanding return. Boundaries remain, but they are flexible rather than rigid. The same applies to work and responsibility. Tasks are carried out with attention, not ambition. Success and failure still occur, but they do not define worth. Effort is offered fully, then released. The results are met without clinging or resistance. This way of living may appear ordinary from the outside. There are no special signs to announce it, yet its impact is quietly profound. It reduces harm, It softens conflict. It introduces a quality of steadiness that others can feel, even if they cannot name it. Those who encounter such presence often describe feeling at ease without knowing why. Conversation slows. Tension eases. There is a sense of being met rather than managed. This is not charisma, but attunement. Not technique, but availability. Over time, this availability deepens into trust. Trust not in outcomes, but in the capacity to meet whatever arises. Pain is no longer feared in advance. Loss is not denied, but it is no longer imagined as annihilation. Even grief is allowed to unfold without being interpreted as a mistake. This trust reshapes the relationship with practice itself. Meditation, reflection, and discipline continue, but their tone changes. They are no longer driven by lack. They become expressions of care, ways of honoring clarity rather than chasing it. Silence becomes more important than explanation. Stillness is valued not for its contrast to activity, but for its intimacy with it. Even movement is recognized as occurring within stillness. Nothing stands outside awareness. In this recognition, the line between teacher and student softens. Learning continues, but hierarchy loses weight. Insight is respected wherever it appears. Age, status, and role become secondary to sincerity. This does not mean that guidance disappears. It means that guidance points back to direct experience rather than to authority. The emphasis is always on seeing for oneself. Confirmation replaces belief. Verification replaces faith. As a result, teachings are not memorized as doctrines. They are absorbed as orientations. They shape how attention is directed, not what conclusions are drawn. They invite investigation rather than compliance. When misunderstanding arises, it is met with patience rather than correction. Error is seen as part of the process, not as failure. Even confusion becomes workable. Nothing needs to be rejected outright. This inclusivity extends to the inner world as well. Thoughts, once labeled unwholesome, are now observed without judgment. Emotions once suppressed are allowed to speak. The psyche reorganizes itself around honesty rather than control. Old patterns may still surface, but they are recognized sooner. Their momentum weakens. What once took years to see is now noticed in moments. This is not because one has become perfect, but because attention has become intimate. With intimacy comes gentleness. Harsh self-criticism fades. Compassion turns inward as naturally as it turns outward. One stops demanding coherence from a living process. Contradiction is tolerated. Complexity is allowed. This tolerance creates resilience. When life shifts unexpectedly, there is room to adapt. When certainty collapses, there is space to regroup. Nothing essential is lost, because nothing essential was being held. From here, even the idea of awakening becomes less interesting. It is recognized as a word pointing to something already functioning. The emphasis shifts from naming to living, from describing to embodying. Stories remain useful, but they are no longer taken as maps. They are understood as reflections, each shaped by context. Their purpose is to awaken recognition, not to prescribe a path. When this is understood, comparison loses its appeal. One no longer measures their experience against another's story. Progress is not tracked. There is no finish line to cross. Life itself becomes the teacher. Each interaction, each challenge, each moment of ease offers instruction. Attention replaces ideology. Presence replaces promise. This does not lead to indifference. Care deepens precisely because things matter. Suffering is not abstract. Joy is not taken for granted. The difference is that neither is owned. In this ownership-free engagement, freedom expresses itself quietly. It does not announce arrival. It does not demand recognition. It moves naturally toward what sustains life. Sometimes this movement appears as generosity, sometimes as restraint, sometimes as silence. There is no formula. What guides it is responsiveness. This responsiveness is the living heart of the tradition, not fixed in words, not preserved in forms, but renewed in each moment of sincere contact. It cannot be inherited. It must be discovered again and again. And yet, what is discovered is never new. It has been present through every search, every error, every attempt to escape or improve. It waited patiently beneath effort. When this is finally seen, there is a quiet relief. Not relief that something has been achieved, but relief that nothing more needs to be carried. The weight of becoming falls away. What remains is simplicity, breathing, seeing, hearing, responding, life unfolding without commentary, awareness resting in itself while participating fully. This is not an ending. It is not a conclusion to the stories. It is their silent background, always present, never exhausted. And in this background, the invitation remains open, not to believe, not to imitate, but to look directly, to notice what has been here all along, to recognize that the path, the traveler, and the ground beneath have never been separate. When that recognition settles, there is nothing more to add. Words naturally fall quiet. The teaching completes itself, not in explanation, but in lived clarity. What followed revealed an even more striking example of a mind that moved freely beyond inherited forms. In the quiet of his private quarters, an aging Zen master prepared to test something far deeper than loyalty or obedience. His understanding of transmission had little to do with objects, documents, or ceremony, and what he was about to do would overturn every conventional idea of spiritual succession. His student, Shuju, had spent many years in rigorous training. Through discipline, confrontation, and long endurance, he had shown a depth of realization that left no doubt about his capacity to carry the teaching forward. When the time came, the master called him in for a final exchange, one meant to mark the formal passing of responsibility. Speaking with gravity, the old teacher acknowledged his age and the limits of time. He explained that Shuju stood alone as the one capable of continuing the work. Then he produced a book, a text that had been handed down from teacher to teacher for 7 generations, enriched over time by the insights of each master who had held it. This volume had long served as the visible proof of authentic authority, the symbol that confirmed rightful inheritance within the lineage. For most students, such a gift would represent the fulfillment of every aspiration. It carried recognition, legitimacy, and belonging to an unbroken chain of awakened figures. To receive it was to be publicly confirmed as a true successor, accepted into the most revered spiritual circle of the age. Shoju's response overturned all of this in an instant. Calmly, without drama, he suggested that if the book was so important, the master should keep it. He explained that he had received the teaching directly, without reliance on written words, and that this was enough. No document was required to confirm what had already been realized. The master insisted, explaining the history, the meaning, and the necessity of the book as a symbol of continuity. As they spoke, They sat beside a brazier where embers glowed steadily. When the book finally passed into Shuju's hands, he did not pause or hesitate. In a single, unguarded motion, he thrust it straight into the fire. For the first time in many years, the old master shouted in shock, demanding an explanation. Shuju shouted back with equal force. In that shared outcry, something wordless was confirmed between them. The burning of the book made visible what could not be written. True understanding cannot be stored in objects, preserved in symbols, or validated by lineage alone. What Shuju had received surpassed any physical token. Together with the earlier stories, this moment revealed a pattern. The man who dissolved his ghost, the teacher who redirected imperial generosity, and the student who burned a sacred text all acted from a level of awareness untouched by social expectation. Their actions were not reckless. Nor were they acts of rebellion. They arose from complete contact with what mattered most, where external forms no longer held absolute authority. Such freedom does not come from rejecting tradition, but from understanding it so thoroughly that one is no longer confined by its surface expressions. When this understanding is present, responses arise freshly, shaped by the reality of the moment rather than by inherited rules. This clarity echoed through the lives of many masters in the mountain monasteries of ancient China, surrounded by mist-filled valleys and the sound of bells drifting across terraced hillsides. They discovered that awakening was not reserved for meditation halls or formal rituals. It lived equally in sweeping floors, preparing meals, tending gardens, and caring for others. Many seekers imagined enlightenment as an escape from ordinary labor, a transcendence of physical effort and mundane responsibility. But the truly realized teachers found the opposite to be true. Genuine understanding deepened their appreciation for simple tasks and revealed a quiet sacredness hidden within daily work. The Master Baizhang embodied this insight completely. Even in his 80s, he worked alongside his students each morning, trimming shrubs, raking paths and pruning trees with careful attention. His movements carried the same precision and presence as formal meditation. To him, there was no separation between cultivation of the land and cultivation of the mind. His students watched with growing discomfort. They worried about his health and felt uneasy seeing their revered teacher engage in labor they believed should fall to younger monks. Again and again they urged him to rest, reminding him of his years of teaching and the respect he had earned. Baizhang only smiled and continued. For him, there was no privilege that exempted one from participation. Every action performed with full awareness was practice. Teaching was not something separate from living. It was expressed through living itself. Eventually, the students hid his tools, convinced this would force him to rest. When Baizhang discovered their absence, he did not argue or search for them. Instead, he quietly withdrew and refused to eat. One day passed, then another. Concern grew until the students returned the tools in quiet apology. The moment they did, Baizhang resumed his work with visible joy and later joined them for the evening meal. That night, he offered a teaching that would echo through centuries. No work, no food. This was not a rule of punishment or control. It was a direct pointing to the dignity of contribution and the inseparability of nourishment and participation. In this view, work was not a distraction from practice. It was practice itself. When any task is met with complete presence, wisdom expresses itself naturally. Spiritual life is not about maintaining a permanent state of bliss, but about bringing awareness into whatever is happening now. Another master, EQ, revealed this same understanding through playfulness rather than discipline. Known for his unconventional manner, he refused to cloak insight in solemnity. Beneath his mischievous exterior lived a sharp clarity, capable of cutting through attachment with ease. As a young attendant, he once broke his teacher's most precious teacup, an irreplaceable object of great artistic and historical value. Rather than panic or hide the evidence, he waited calmly. When his teacher returned, Ikkyu asked a sudden question about why all things must die. After hearing the response, he revealed the shattered pieces and declared that the cup's time had come. Instead of anger, the teacher felt delight. Ikkyu had turned loss into a living demonstration of impermanence, showing a relationship to objects free of clinging and fear. The broken cup became a teaching far more valuable than its intact form ever had been. Perhaps the most radical expression of living Zen appeared in the life of Tosui. Having achieved recognition, status, and institutional success, he felt increasingly constrained by formal structures. One day, he walked away from everything: his temple, his students, and his reputation. Years later, he was found living among beggars beneath a bridge, sharing their hardships without distinction. When a former disciple challenged him, Tosui invited the student to live as he did. After witnessing death, hunger, and discomfort firsthand, the student realized the limits of his own understanding. Tosui's quiet dismissal was not cruelty, but clarity. He showed that true freedom is not dependent on favorable conditions. Awakened awareness finds meaning and peace anywhere. Without dividing life into sacred and profane, together these lives point to the same truth. Enlightenment is not a place we reach, but a way we move through what is given. When seen clearly, ordinary experience reveals itself as complete, just as it is. Seen from this perspective, the extraordinary dissolves back into the ordinary, and the ordinary reveals a depth that had always been overlooked. What these stories quietly insist upon is that realization does not lift us out of life, but places us more fully within it. Nothing needs to be added, refined, or adorned. The clarity that awakened teachers embody shows itself precisely in how they meet simple circumstances without resistance or embellishment. This way of living does not announce itself with dramatic gestures or mystical displays. It appears in how a person eats when hungry, works when work is needed, and rests when the body is tired. It is present in how one responds to loss without bitterness, to success without attachment, and to uncertainty without fear. Such responses arise not from moral discipline imposed from outside, but from a natural alignment with how things are. When Baizhang insisted on working, he was not proving endurance or humility. He was expressing a mind that did not separate itself from the flow of conditions. When Ikkyu laughed in the face of a broken treasure, he was not dismissing value, but revealing a deeper one. When Tosui slept among beggars, he was not rejecting spirituality, but refusing to confine it within respectable boundaries. In each case, understanding took the shape of action rather than explanation. This challenges the common assumption that wisdom must look refined, orderly, or socially acceptable. Often, the clearer the seeing, the less concern there is for maintaining appearances. Action becomes simple, direct, and sometimes unsettling to those who rely on familiar structures for security. Yet, beneath the surface shock lies a profound compassion, one that responds honestly to the reality of each moment. The essence of this compassion is not sentimentality. It does not arise from trying to be kind or virtuous. It emerges naturally when self-centered concerns loosen their grip. When there is no fixed image to protect, no role to maintain, responses become flexible and appropriate. Help is offered where it is needed. Firmness appears where softness would mislead, and silence replaces words when words would obscure. This is why Zen stories so often appear paradoxical or abrupt. They are not designed to comfort the intellect, but to unsettle habitual ways of thinking. They point toward a mode of understanding that cannot be captured in concepts. Once grasped intellectually, it slips away. Once embodied, it becomes invisible. The mistake many seekers make is to look for realization as a special inner experience. They wait for a moment of dramatic awakening that will permanently alter their emotional landscape. But the masters repeatedly demonstrate that clarity is far more ordinary than that. It is found in recognizing the awareness that is already present, regardless of whether the mind feels calm or restless. Thoughts continue to arise. Emotions still move through the body. Circumstances remain unpredictable. What changes is not the content of experience, but the relationship to it. Instead of being pulled endlessly into reaction, there is space. Instead of resistance, there is curiosity. Instead of grasping for certainty, there is trust in direct perception. This trust does not eliminate difficulty. Pain still hurts. Loss still brings sorrow. Confusion still appears. But these experiences are no longer taken as evidence of failure or deficiency. They are simply part of the living process, no more personal than the weather passing through a valley. In this sense, awakening is not an escape from suffering, but a change in how suffering is understood. Rather than something to be eliminated at all costs, it becomes another teacher, revealing where attachment still hides. Each contraction of the heart becomes an invitation to soften rather than harden. This is why the path never truly ends. Even after profound insight, there are always more gates to pass through, as Zen suggested. Life continues to present situations that challenge understanding in new forms. Relationships test patience, aging tests, identity, death tests, everything we think we know. Yet with each encounter, there is also an opportunity to express wisdom more fully. Not as an idea, but as a way of being. The awakened life is not measured by how peaceful one feels in isolation, but by how openly one meets the complexity of human existence. When this openness matures, distinctions begin to lose their sharpness. Practice and daily life merge. Sacred and mundane blur. Teaching happens without intention to teach. Learning occurs without effort to improve. There is simply engagement with what is in front of us. This engagement carries a quiet joy, not dependent on success or comfort. It is the joy of participation, of belonging fully to the movement of life. Even in difficulty, there is a sense of intimacy with experience, a feeling of being exactly where one is. The old Zen, saying that mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers, takes on new meaning here. After all the questioning and undoing, things return to themselves, but they are no longer filtered through the need to control or possess them. They stand as they are, complete. In this simplicity, nothing is missing. The search that once felt urgent gradually relaxes, not because all questions have been answered, but because the need for final answers dissolves. Living itself becomes sufficient. This does not mean withdrawal or indifference. On the contrary, it allows for deeper involvement. Freed from the burden of self-protection, energy naturally flows toward care and responsiveness. Helping others is no longer a moral obligation, but a spontaneous movement, like a hand reaching out when balance is lost. Seen this way, the teachings left behind by the masters are not instructions to follow, but reflections of what is possible. They point not toward a distant ideal, but back toward what is already present, waiting to be recognized in each ordinary moment. When this recognition deepens, life is no longer approached as a problem to be solved, but as a reality to be met. The impulse to fix, improve, or secure experience gradually loosens, replaced by a quiet confidence in direct encounter. Each situation is allowed to speak for itself. Without being forced into preconceived meanings, action arises, not from anxiety about outcomes, but from intimacy with what is happening now. This intimacy brings a subtle shift in how effort is understood. Practice no longer feels like a project aimed at a future reward. Sitting, walking, speaking, and listening become expressions of the same awareness. There is effort, but it is unforced. Discipline, but without rigidity. The body moves, the mind responds, and attention remains present without strain. In this way, even confusion has a place. Rather than being treated as an obstacle, it is seen as part of the unfolding process. Moments of not knowing invite humility and openness. They prevent understanding from hardening into belief. The mind stays flexible, willing to be surprised. This flexibility is what allows wisdom to remain alive. Fixed conclusions are replaced by ongoing inquiry. Instead of clinging to answers, there is a readiness to question again and again. Not from doubt, but from curiosity. Not from lack, but from abundance. Such a way of being cannot be imitated through rules or techniques alone. It emerges gradually, shaped by attention and honesty. The stories of the old masters are not blueprints, but echoes of this living process. Each responded uniquely, shaped by circumstances, temperament, and time. What unites them is not behavior, but clarity. Clarity does not mean certainty. It means seeing what is present without distortion. When fear arises, it is seen as fear. When desire appears, it is recognized as desire. Neither is rejected nor indulged. Both are allowed to move through awareness like weather passing through open sky. In this openness, identity begins to soften. The sense of being a separate self, standing apart from experience, becomes less convincing. Thoughts and emotions are seen as events rather than possessions. They happen, but they are not who we are. What remains is the knowing itself, quiet, steady, and inclusive. This knowing does not need protection. It is not threatened by change or loss. It does not depend on circumstances aligning in a particular way. Whether life feels expansive or contracted, it remains unchanged, witnessing all conditions without preference. As trust in this awareness grows, fear of impermanence loosens. Change is no longer felt as an enemy, but as the natural rhythm of existence. Birth and death, gain and loss, meeting and parting are seen as movements within a larger continuity. Nothing is excluded. From this view, compassion deepens naturally. When the boundary between self and others softens, the suffering of others is felt more directly. Helping becomes a response rather than a duty. Sometimes it takes the form of action. Sometimes it appears as silence. Sometimes it means allowing someone else to struggle without interference. This discernment cannot be reduced to rules. What is appropriate in one moment may be harmful in another. Only direct awareness can sense the difference. This is why the awakened life often appears unpredictable. It is guided by presence rather than by formula. Presence, however, does not remove responsibility. On the contrary, it intensifies it. When actions are no longer justified by roles or doctrines, their impact becomes more immediate. Each word, each gesture carries weight. There is no place to hide behind abstraction. This can feel daunting at first. Without fixed identities to rely on, vulnerability increases. Yet within this vulnerability lies a profound freedom. When there is nothing to defend, energy previously spent on self-protection becomes available for engagement.
life is met more fully, without armor.
In such engagement, even the smallest moments take on significance. Drinking tea, hearing rain, exchanging a glance, all become complete in themselves. Nothing needs to be extraordinary to be meaningful. Meaning is found in presence, not in intensity. This is why the masters so often pointed back to ordinary life, not as a consolation prize, but as the very field of realization. The marketplace, the kitchen, the road, the sick bed, all become places of practice. There is nowhere else to go.
Gradually, the question shifts from how to attain enlightenment to how to live honestly.
The focus moves from inner states to relational clarity. How do we listen? How do we speak? How do we act when no one is watching? These questions shape practice more deeply than any abstract ideal. Over time, the distinction between practice and life dissolves. There is simply living with attention. Mistakes still happen. Habits still surface.
But they are met with understanding rather than condemnation. Learning continues, not driven by ambition, but by sincerity.
This sincerity is perhaps the quiet heart of the path. It does not seek recognition. It does not compare. It does not measure progress. It simply responds, moment by moment, to what is true.
When this response becomes natural, seeking relaxes. Not because everything is resolved, but because the impulse to escape experience fades. Life, as it is,
becomes workable. Even painful moments are included, held within a wider context of awareness.
In this inclusion, a gentle gratitude emerges, not for specific outcomes, but for the chance to participate at all, to breathe, to feel, to perceive, to respond. Nothing is taken for granted, yet nothing is clung to.
This is not a dramatic ending, but a quiet continuity. The path does not conclude with fireworks or final declarations.
It continues as walking, speaking, eating, resting, the same as before, yet subtly different. The stories fall away. The teachings fade into the background. What remains is the simple fact of being here, awake to what unfolds. In this simplicity, there is nothing lacking and nothing extra. And so the teaching completes itself without conclusion, returning again and again to this moment, just as it is.
This does not suggest withdrawing from the world or abandoning the wish to ease suffering. It points instead to a different ground from which action arises. Effort continues, care deepens, and responsibility remains, yet they are no longer fueled by inner resistance. Action flows from acceptance rather than struggle.
When this shift occurs, the distance between spiritual aspiration and daily life quietly dissolves.
Every encounter becomes a living expression of kindness. Every ordinary task becomes a place where awareness can settle. Every difficulty becomes a guide, inviting a deeper understanding that could not appear without it. This is the heart of Zen, not an escape from life, but an intimate meeting with it. When approached with full attention and an open heart, ordinary existence reveals an inexhaustible depth. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. Life itself becomes the teaching. When this understanding is embodied, it is felt more than spoken. Peace and clarity radiate naturally, without effort or display. In such a state, consciousness aligns with the fundamental rhythms of existence, and presence itself begins to teach what words cannot. It becomes clear that it is possible to be completely human, with all the vulnerability that entails, and completely awake at the same time. As the long journey through these stories draws to a close, a quieter and more encompassing recognition comes into view. Everything that has unfolded confusion and insight, longing and fulfillment, separation and connection has been occurring within a single, undivided field of awareness. Nothing was ever outside it. Nothing was ever truly fragmented. The final teachings point beyond even the most refined distinctions. Teacher and student, wisdom and ignorance, awakening and ordinary life begin to lose their sharp edges. In his last moments beneath the sala trees at Kushinagar, surrounded by disciples overwhelmed with grief, the Buddha offered words that distilled a lifetime of insight into simple, penetrating images. He spoke of kings and rulers as dust motes drifting in sunlight, of gold and jewels as scattered stones along a road,
of silken robes as rags already returning to earth. Those listening understood that he was not dismissing the world, but revealing how it appears when seen from the widest possible perspective.
What humanity treasures so fiercely reveals itself as fleeting when viewed through awakened eyes. He described vast worlds as seeds, great lakes as a drop of oil on the skin, and the teachings themselves as illusions crafted by magicians. These were not statements of denial, but expressions of scale. When awareness opens beyond its usual limits, even the grandest achievements are recognized as temporary movements within something immeasurably larger. Then he spoke words that unsettled even devoted seekers. Liberation itself, he said, can appear like an embroidered cloth in a dream. Even the idea of freedom becomes a subtle binding when it is grasped as an object to attain. True release lies beyond both suffering and the urge to escape suffering. The path, he suggested, is necessary, yet it dissolves into what has always been present. Meditation was acknowledged as stable and essential, like a mountain pillar, yet even the concept of perfect peace was revealed as another disturbance when clung to. Finally, he spoke of right and wrong as the twisting movement of a dragon, and beliefs as traces left by passing seasons, not because ethics lose meaning, but because awakened awareness responds so precisely to each moment that rigid judgments fall away. These words pointed toward a unity that includes all opposites, without being confined by any of them. In this view, seeker and sought, confusion and clarity, are recognized as temporary expressions within the same boundless consciousness. The teaching was complete not because it explained everything, but because it pointed directly to the source from which all explanations arise. Centuries later, in Japan, this same understanding expressed itself through a Zen master who demonstrated the power of silence. When invited to speak before the emperor, he offered no discourse. Instead, he played a single note on a bamboo flute. The sound arose, filled the hall, and vanished. In that brief moment, the entire teaching was revealed. Form emerging from emptiness, returning to emptiness. Nothing added, nothing withheld. That single note conveyed what countless words could not. Thought arises from silence and dissolves back into it. Emotion emerges from stillness and returns again. Even the sense of a separate self appears within awareness and eventually resolves into the unity that was never truly divided. Around the same time, a blind man living near a temple demonstrated another expression of this unity. Unable to see faces, he listened deeply to voices. Over years of careful attention, he noticed how words and hidden intentions often diverged. Praise carried envy. Sympathy concealed satisfaction. Yet when he listened to the voice of a certain Zen master, he heard no contradiction. Joy was only joy. Sorrow was only sorrow.
There was no gap between feeling and expression. This revealed the mark of integrated awareness. When consciousness is no longer divided against itself, there is no need to manage appearances. Speech, action, and intention arise from the same source. Nothing is concealed. Nothing is performed. Authenticity replaces effort. As the stories come to rest, a single theme remains. Each tale, in its own way,
has been pointing to the same recognition. Awareness is already whole. Separation is an appearance created by habit, not a fundamental truth. The masters did not become something extraordinary. They simply stopped overlooking what had always been present.
This recognition does not remove life's challenges, nor does it promise constant ease, but it provides a ground that remains steady regardless of circumstance.
From this ground, every moment becomes a teacher. Every person encountered becomes a mirror. Confusion invites deeper seeing. Suffering signals misplaced attachment. Joy reveals our natural condition.
As these words fade into silence, something remains that has been present throughout. That which has listened. That which has witnessed every image and story.
That awareness is not separate from you. It is what you are.
It is the same presence that spoke through the Buddha, sounded through the flute, and resonated through a sincere voice without division. Here, the circle closes without conclusion. The search ends, not in achievement, but in recognition. The journey and the destination are seen as one.
The question and the answer dissolve into the same quiet knowing. Rest here, where nothing was ever missing, and nothing was ever broken.
From this resting place, life does not end or withdraw. It continues to move, to change, to unfold in countless forms. Yet something fundamental has shifted. What once felt like a struggle to arrive somewhere else is revealed as an unnecessary burden. The movement of life is no longer opposed, it is met.
In this meeting, effort remains, but it is no longer tense. Care remains, but it is no longer anxious. One still acts, chooses,
responds, and serves, yet these actions arise from a quieter center. There is no longer the sense of pushing against the moment in order to justify one's existence or secure a future peace. Peace is recognized as the ground from which all movement arises. When action flows from this ground, compassion becomes natural rather than intentional. One does not need to remind oneself to be kind. Kindness appears as the appropriate response, shaped by the situation itself. Presence replaces strategy. Listening becomes deeper than interpretation. Even disagreement carries a softness that does not harden into separation. This is why Zen places so little emphasis on ideals and so much emphasis on direct seeing. Ideals tend to live in the future, asking life to become something else before it can be accepted. Direct seeing happens now. It does not argue with what appears. It allows reality to disclose itself fully, without resistance or demand. Seen in this way, the ordinary world is no longer ordinary. Washing dishes, walking through a crowded street, sitting in silence, or speaking with a stranger all carry the same depth. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is elevated above anything else. The sacred is not found elsewhere. It is recognized here, precisely where one is standing. The ancient stories were never meant to be admired from a distance. They were offered as mirrors. Each koan, each gesture, each silence invites the same recognition in whoever encounters it. The masters were not presenting solutions to be memorized, but openings through which awareness might turn back upon itself. When this turning occurs, it is often quiet. There may be no dramatic insight, no rush of certainty. More often, there is a subtle easing, a sense that something long carried can finally be set down. The mind loosens its grip on explanations. The heart softens its defenses. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a mystery to inhabit. This does not make one passive. On the contrary, engagement becomes more intimate, because there is no longer a need to protect a fixed identity. Responsiveness increases. One can admit not knowing. One can change course without shame. One can meet pain without immediately trying to escape it. In this openness, the boundary between self and world becomes more permeable. The suffering of others is felt more directly, not as an abstract concept, but as a living presence. Compassion is no longer an idea about helping. It is the natural movement of awareness, recognizing itself in another form. This is why the Buddha's final words were not instructions for future generations to follow rigidly. They were descriptions of how reality appears when nothing is being grasped.
He was not negating the world, nor was he denying its relative importance. He was pointing to the freedom that comes from seeing clearly, without distortion.
The same freedom was expressed when a master chose silence over speech, or a single note over explanation. In those moments, teaching and life were not separate. There was no attempt to persuade or convince. The truth was allowed to resonate on its own, trusting that those who were ready would hear what could not be said. Even the blind man's insight arose not from study, but from intimacy. By listening without visual distraction, he discovered how divided human expression often is. And by encountering a voice without division, he recognized something rare and unmistakable. Unity does not announce itself. It is felt as coherence, as simplicity, as an absence of inner contradiction. When consciousness is unified, there is no need to perform goodness or conceal darkness. Both light and shadow are included, understood, and integrated. Actions are guided not by rigid rules, but by a sensitivity that adjusts naturally to each moment, like a hand finding balance without calculation. This sensitivity is not something to be cultivated as an achievement. It emerges when unnecessary tension falls away, when one stops insisting on being a particular kind of person. When the effort to maintain a self-image relaxes, what remains is responsiveness itself.
At the end of these reflections, nothing new is being offered. There is no final instruction to remember, no practice to master before rest is allowed. What is being pointed to has been present throughout every story, every pause, every word, and silence alike.
Awareness has never been absent. It has accompanied every thought, every emotion, every moment of confusion and clarity. It does not belong to anyone, yet it animates every life. It does not need improvement, yet it allows all improvement to occur. When this is recognized, even briefly, the search loses its urgency. Questions soften. Answers become less important than the space in which both arise. One does not stop living. One stops arguing with life. And so, as everything settles back into quiet,
there is nothing to conclude. The teaching does not end, it dissolves. What remains is the simple fact of being, unadorned and sufficient. Breathing happens. Sounds arise and fade. Thoughts come and go. Within all of this, something remains unchanged, not as an object to observe, but as the observing itself. This is not a destination reached at the end of a long journey. It is the ground upon which every step has already been taken. Resting here requires no effort, only the willingness to stop turning away. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be understood. What you have been seeking has been present from the very beginning. quietly illuminating every moment, waiting for recognition rather than attainment. From this recognition, there is no sense of arrival, no marker that says something has been completed. Life continues exactly as it did before, yet it is no longer carried in the same way. What once felt heavy now feels workable. What once felt confusing now feels intimate. The change is not in circumstances, but in relationship.
One still wakes up each morning into a world that is unpredictable. Bodies age. Situations shift. Joy and sorrow continue to appear. Yet beneath these movements,
there is a quiet steadiness that does not depend on outcomes. This steadiness is not something held on to.
It is noticed again and again whenever resistance relaxes.
In this noticing, effort becomes simple. One does what needs to be done without the additional burden of self-judgment. Success and failure lose some of their sharp edges. They are seen as movements within a much larger field, meaningful but not defining. Nothing needs to be rejected in order for peace to be present. This is why Zen does not promise a life free from difficulty. It points instead to a way of meeting difficulty without fragmentation. Pain may still arise, but it is no longer compounded by the story that something has gone wrong at the deepest level.
Grief can be felt fully, without becoming a verdict on existence. Fear can be acknowledged, without being obeyed.
When awareness rests in itself, emotions are allowed to move naturally. They are neither indulged nor suppressed.
Like weather passing through an open landscape, they appear, change, and dissolve. The landscape itself is not threatened by the storm.
From this openness, relationships also change. Listening deepens. One hears not only words, but the feeling beneath them. Responses become less reactive, less driven by the need to defend or impress. There is more room for silence, more patience with uncertainty, more willingness to be touched by another's experience. This does not make one detached or
distant. On the contrary, intimacy increases. Without the constant preoccupation with self, attention is freed to meet what is actually present. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. Care becomes less about control and more about understanding. The ancient teachers trusted this simplicity. They did not try to systematize awakening into something repeatable or predictable. They pointed again and again to what is immediate: a gesture, a sound, a moment of silence. Each pointing was complete in itself, requiring nothing to be added. Their confidence did not come from certainty, but from intimacy with the nature of mind. They knew that what they were indicating could not be lost,
because it had never been acquired. It could be overlooked, misunderstood, or ignored, but it could not disappear.
This is why the teachings often seem to undo themselves. Just when the mind begins to grasp an idea of truth, another story dissolves that idea. Just when a concept feels solid, it is gently undermined. Not to confuse, but to free. Not to deny meaning, but to prevent fixation. In this way, Zen functions less like a philosophy and more like a mirror. It reflects back the movement of mind itself. In seeing this movement clearly,
identification loosens. Thoughts are recognized as thoughts. Beliefs are seen as temporary structures. Identity becomes fluid rather than fixed. What remains constant is awareness itself, not as a personal possession, but as the open space in which personal experience unfolds. This awareness does not need protection. It is not improved by effort, nor diminished by neglect. It is equally present in confusion and clarity. When this is recognized, even briefly, Something essential relaxes. The long habit of striving softens. The sense of being incomplete loosens its grip. One may still pursue goals, still care deeply, still engage fully, but without the underlying assumption that fulfillment lies somewhere else. Life is no longer a means to an end. It is the expression itself. Each moment stands on its own, complete as it is. Even longing is allowed to be part of this completeness, without needing to be resolved. At the end of the path,
there is no grand revelation waiting. There is only the recognition of what has always been here, the sound of breath, the play of light, the quiet knowing that experiences are happening, nothing extraordinary, yet nothing lacking.
The stories fall silent here, not because there is nothing more to say, but because words have done what they can do. They have pointed, they have circled, they have loosened the grip of certainty. Now, they step aside. What remains does not belong to the stories. It belongs to the one who has been listening, not as an identity, but as the listening itself. The awareness that has followed every sentence, every pause, every resonance. In this awareness, there is no need to conclude, no need to summarize or remember. The teaching is not something carried forward. It is something lived, moment by moment, in the simplest ways: walking, breathing, speaking, resting. Each action arises from the same source and returns to it. Nothing stands apart. Nothing is excluded.
And so, without ceremony, without final instruction, the journey completes itself by revealing that it never truly began. There was never a distance to cross.
Never a state to achieve. Only a gentle forgetting, followed by a quiet remembering. Rest here, not as an ending, but as what has always been present. Let the stories fade. Let the mind settle. What remains is enough.